Good evening, and welcome to the final Board of Ed meeting for the year. Can we have the roll call, please?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Paul-Yuk?
Here.
Ms. Poland?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson?
Here.
Student Representatives Grace Sanders?
Here.
Madeline Pliskin?
Here.
And Mr. Zdanowitz?
I think in honor of the last meeting, can we have a simultaneous Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have no student participation this time, but there is a revision to the agenda order. It meets with everybody's approval, which is to have the equity and excellence update before the public communications. I apologize, but there are many people eager to do the presentation, and we wanted to start with them. So, without any objections, let's move directly to the equity and excellence update.
As you know, a few years ago, we started capping the year with this presentation on our efforts for equity, justice, inclusion, and what we've done over the course of the year. Because each year, there's some new things that come up that some schools do, that some individual students do, that some leaders do, that really are examples not just in West Hartford for that school, but for our other schools that end up copying some of these ideas that we've seen presented at the end of the year, and also actually gain traction across the state. And these ideas of inclusion run the gamut from the topics. And I'm thinking of Unified Theater, which was last Thursday and Friday night, as an example of inclusion, kids coming together, started here by a Conard graduate. It's a combination of Conard and Hall students together. Michaela Connery started it, and almost 20 years ago, and now it is in actually 20 states, the same program. So just great success moving forward, and that's what we're looking for with these kind of things. So with that said, Roszena.
Thank you, Tom. You stole a little bit of my thunder, but as you said, each year we are pleased to bring to the board and the viewing public a report and presentation that showcases the equity and excellence in the West Hartford Public Schools. And as you know, the district has been fully immersed in the cultural competence, equity, and diversity work, and it remains an ongoing commitment and priority for all of us and aligned with our district and our board goals. So it is so inspiring for me to bear witness to so much of the exciting and often bold and courageous work being done in our schools. And I go home and talk about it every night. My husband and son tell me, you're repeating yourself again. So I'm excited to have this platform and this forum so that you can hear from our frontline change agents yourself on the incredible and courageous work they're doing. So tonight you will hear 3 short presentations from Whiting Lane, Wolcott, and Hall high school students, staff, and parents that reflect our commitment to building our cultural competence and engaging a wide range of stakeholders in the ongoing work. Now, as a matter of general logistics, some of our speakers and their families have conflicting commitments. So after each presentation, we'll open the floor for your questions and your comments so that anyone who needs to leave after they present and respond can do so. And we have created a PowerPoint presentation as a visual enhancement, but we really want the voices, the experiences, and the reflections of our presenters to resonate with you most. So the first group here at the table with me are presenters from Whiting Lane. Principal Karen Cookish has taken the podium just to briefly introduce this team and frame how students, staff, and parents have worked collaboratively to promote dialogue and racial justice and equity. Karen.
Thank you. Good evening. I am so proud to be here with you this evening. I'm proud to be a part of a district that puts so much energy and so much focus into raising awareness in terms of cultural competence and equity, diversity, and inclusiveness for all. I feel very blessed to be a part of the Whiting Lane community specifically, where I learn something new each and every day, where we practice what we preach, and we work so closely together, students, families, and faculty members, to do our very best to teach our children how to be better human beings, how to be more aware, more accepting of differences, how to be good citizens, and most importantly, how to be good people. We are so proud to be a part, I'm so proud to be a part of this incredible team before you tonight, who will share the background and the highlights of our efforts that we've taken in terms of racial justice training for this school year, including sessions for 4th and 5th grade students and their families, and a separate professional development training which was held for all staff members, which was very well received. I am honored to introduce to you Ms. Carrie Nicewander, Whiting Lane parent and racial justice trainer and presenter, someone whom I deeply admire and respect. Mr. Chris Haddad, Whiting Lane parent and PTO co-president, who has a great enthusiasm and insight and has been instrumental in terms of organizing our efforts for this year. And last but not least, our 2 5th grade students who attended the training and who are excellent role models, who embody all of the character traits that we are trying to instill in our young people today. Johnny DeWander and Miss Mary Haddad. So with that, I turn it over to the team.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Okay. My name is Carrie, as Karen said, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. And I want to start by doing something a little bit different for a minute. I want to ask that you pretend that we are all farmers. So we have these plots that we are in charge of cultivating. And we need to grow food in order to feed our families, in order to feed our children, in order to feed our community. So what are you growing? So think about it a minute. What would you grow on your farm? And tell me one fruit, one vegetable. What would you grow on your farm? Tomatoes. Potatoes. Corn. Apples. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got some tomatoes, potatoes, corn, and apples. And as a farmer, you want to grow a lot of that food. You want to be sure no one is hungry. You want to be sure that you can store some food away for leaner times. And you learn that there's a fertilizer. It's a fertilizer that's going to help you grow lots and lots of food. And it's going to help your farm produce in abundance. And so you decide you're going to use this fertilizer. Now, over time, you realize that this fertilizer is filled with toxins. But you keep on using it because it helps you to grow lots of potatoes and tomatoes and corn and apples. And so despite those toxins, your children start using that fertilizer too. And then their children start using it, and then their children start using it. And pretty soon, that fertilizer has been used for 300 years. 300 years, that fertilizer with those toxins, with that poison, is in the ground. And after 300 years of using these chemicals, using this fertilizer, what is the soil like? The soil's contaminated, it's depleted, and it's toxic. And what is the groundwater like that runs through that earth? It is contaminated, it is depleted, it is toxic, because the poison has leaked into the water, into the food, and into everything. The poison is everywhere. And so finally, the government realizes that this particular fertilizer is filled with toxins that harm the water, the soil, and all things that are growing. And so they ban its use. And now for almost 50 years, we have had laws that prevent the use of that fertilizer. After 300 years of poisoning our water, our land, and our food, we've had 50 years where it has been illegal to use that fertilizer. And so now what is the soil like? After 300 years of poisoning it, and just 50 years without that poison. Is it better? Is it still contaminated? Absolutely. So it's still polluted, it's still toxic. And the groundwater that runs through it is still contaminated, it's still dangerous to drink. The poison is real, and it is still in the soil of our society. And as you have probably guessed, that toxin, that poison, is racism, and it is pervasive in our world. It is in the soil, it is in the water, and it is deeply rooted in our land and in our institutions. And so until we can see these connections, the reality that racism is in our water, in ourselves, in our schools, then we cannot effectively fight racism. The training is based on the principle that we have to unmask racism in order to dismantle it. And so this is the illustration that we use to begin the trainings. And I want to go backwards quickly to talk about how that training came to be. So when my oldest son was in 4th grade, he did the Connecticut History Project. And as parents, we were invited to come in and to see all of the students present important people from the history of Connecticut. And as my husband went around from presentation to presentation, from student to student, we saw that every single important person from the history of Connecticut who was portrayed was white. Every single one. The students were learning that the only people who mattered in the history of Connecticut were white. And this is teaching white supremacy. It is unintentionally doing this, but it is part of the racism that is in our institutions, that poison that runs through our society. And so we spoke to the teacher who said that there were just no resources written at a 4th grade level on people of color in the history of Connecticut. And so then we met again with her and then with the school curriculum specialist and the district curriculum specialist, and they were very responsive. They were not defensive. They agreed that this was a problem. And so we talked more about ideas to address it and gathered up 12 people who were historians, writers, and teachers. And together we created 4th grade resources on people of color in the history of Connecticut. We wrote them ourselves and wrote them at a 4th grade level. They were used as a pilot that next year, and then the following year they were used district-wide so that students could learn about people of color in the history of Connecticut, no longer learning that the only ones who mattered were white. So in conversations about this project as it was going forward, we thought it would be exciting and important to train the students and the parents and the teachers so that they too can be involved in unmasking and dismantling racism. Because the 4th grade history project is just one example. And so training the schools and the people in the schools to unmask and dismantle racism can help us address every instance where racism poisons our schools. So we did a kids training with 4th and 5th graders and with their parents. And with the kids training, we used the farming analogy. We did it much more interactive than I did with you. They had to give me many more answers than you did. But we did the farming analogy with the children so that they could understand that from that analogy level. And then we discussed what racism means and used a simple definition with the kids. Then we discussed racism in our history and racism now. And we talked about overt racism and covert racism, the kind you have to look for, the kind you have to unmask. And we watched a video with them called The Bike Thief. In The Bike Thief, it presented a young black man who looked like he was stealing a bike and a young white man who looked like he was stealing a bike. And the kids saw the difference in how those two individuals were treated, which very visibly demonstrated the racism in our society. And then we spent some time with the kids talking about how we can unmask it, how we can dismantle it, how we can get rid of that poison that is in our soil. And I asked the kids if they can do this, and they resoundingly said, yes, yes, we can. And so it was really exciting to be in that context. And we ended it with these quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and an African proverb about doing this work together, and finally encouraging them that they truly can become agents of change in their schools. So then after that, we did the teacher training. And the teacher training, we did a more in-depth definition of racism and racism in our society. We used images like this one, and then the next one as well, to show the racism that is very visibly still real. And then we talked more specifically about the classroom context. We talked about intent versus impact when you are a teacher. We talked about microaggressions in the classroom, and this slide just lists a few of those microaggressions in the classroom. That website has even more, and we handed out all of them to the teachers. And then we talked about racism and white supremacy in homework, stories, and tests, and even offered them a sample quiz to take and to look at these questions and see the implicit bias that is within these questions, and talked through each one of these questions as well. And so finally, we talked about strategies for challenging the status quo, strategies for discussing racism in class, and for reworking problematic materials. For example, the fourth question in here was a real question, and we talked about how the teacher actually reworked it to be about a living wage and fair wages for farm workers. So we can rework these materials. Afterwards, I know that students and teachers were talking about racism in their classrooms in new ways, because I had teachers talking to me about that. I had a teacher contact me about different approaches to curriculum materials within a couple days of the teacher training. And I know that students and teachers were talking about how to unmask and dismantle racism so we can be healthy and get rid of this poison that is in our soil. So thank you for your time, and Chris is going to talk a little bit now.
Thank you for having us here tonight. Again, my name is Chris Haddad. I'm the co-president of the PTO at Whiting Lane School. And I think I'd like to preface my brief comments with a thought first about why we decided to make it a priority in our school to provide an opportunity for the students and their parents to receive this racial justice training that Carrie has described. If you look around our country, whether you're looking at Washington, D.C., in the void of leadership on issues related to racial justice, or to Charlottesville for examples of frightening efforts to turn back the clock on what progress we have made, or to the multitude of news stories in our cities around the country highlighting the failure of law enforcement to be colorblind, or even more recently, the abandonment of Puerto Rico as the latest example of deep-seated institutional bias. And these are just a few examples of many. One might conclude that we're too late. But as I sit next to my youngest of three, who is a fifth grader at Whiting Lane, I also think back to the first days of kindergarten, watching all of the students interact in the most wonderful way, generally oblivious to the things like skin color. And I realized that our greatest hope in making an impact with respect to things like racial justice is by working with our children before much of the darker spirits working in our world have rubbed off on them. Or to use Carrie's analogy, before the poison in our soil has had too much time to soak into their roots. So as a parent and as a PTO leader, it was very important for us to provide this opportunity for learning and dialogue. And I know I echo all of the other parents who attended the training with me that it was an eye-opening experience for us as parents and for our kids. For me, I think one of the most important takeaways was this: none of us are immune to the impact of living in a culture where racial injustice is in the water, in the soil, built into our institutions all around us. And the first and perhaps most important step in combating this impact is awareness. And it's having our eyes opened a bit more as to the nature and extent to which the conditions which allow injustice to thrive all around us all the time. And that is decidedly not the environment in which I want to raise my children. So it's important that we do it here with our kids in the schools where there is the greatest hope of making the impact we need, that we address issues of racial justice. It's equally important that we do it now. There are too many ugly voices of injustice and hatred that have seized some of the most powerful bully pulpits, and we need to push back by telling a different story and reinforcing the right priorities of love, of equality, and racial justice. And the programs such as the one you've just heard about tonight are so important, not just because they reinforce the right message, but also because they provide the right vocabulary to understand the issues at a deeper level. And they provide the tools to help promote a competence in the kids to address these issues as they encounter them in their lives in an effective manner. And providing that education is as important, if not more, than anything else that we teach our kids. So to the greatest degree possible, I'm encouraging the board to support programs like Carrie's in all our schools so we can continue that work of nurturing those values that are critical to a healthy community that I know we all want to see continue to grow in West Hartford and beyond. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes, and I can't remember who, it's an old Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. It would be great if we had done this a long time ago, but we are where we are, and I would just urge that the board think about continuing to promote these type of programs, because they are urgently needed. And I have the privilege of turning this over to my daughter, Mary.
I'm Mary Haddad, and I'm a 5th grader at Whiting Lane. Our school had a racial justice night, and I went with my dad. At first, I didn't really know what to expect, but I learned a lot. It's unfair to treat people of color differently. Racism is shown all around the world, even though it should have been eliminated a long time ago. It's not fair that just because you have a different skin color, you should get pushed around or bullied or even ignored. At the Racial Justice Night, there was an awesome analogy that Mrs. Nicewander already mentioned about a farmer accidentally planting poison soil in his garden. I really thought about this after the event and what every part of the story represents. It's a little different than what Miss Nicewander said. It's kind of my viewpoint, but the plants are the people of color and the soil is the white people surrounding them. The farmer planting the poison soil is kind of like the first person, the creator of the chaos, and the soil represents the more people bullying, and the plants die after a while of sitting and growing in that poison soil. I think we could all learn from what we see and even what we do, because a lot of the time, even when we don't realize it, we're being racist, and we've all done it once or twice, even if we don't want to admit it to ourselves. If we do admit it to ourselves, what we will do, or what we did do, or what we can do better, then we can all change that little bit of racism in our life. Even if it's not, you step in if you see someone getting bullied because of their race, or if it's dangerous, call a trusted adult, or even the police. We can spread the word, deliver the message, however you want to think of it, but if you do change and help others change, then you're helping the earth and all the people who are different on the planet, just one word at a time. Thank you. And now it's Johnny. Hi, my name is Johnny, and I'm in the 5th grade. Racism has been a part of our country for a long time and is still a part of our nation. In the training, I watched a bike thief video. I saw how a white boy is trusted while a black boy was not. This made me think that some people believe that white people are more trustworthy than black people. It also made me think that there are people who just want to get black people in trouble to prove that white people are better. I've experienced this in my life. Some children do not play with me because I look different than them. They said it's because of the color of my skin. I believe racism is real and we have to do something about it. I believe a very important part in making a difference is educating people about racism. We can take action by protesting, going to rallies, and pointing out when things are racist, being aware of racism, and noticing it in ourselves too. We all have pieces of racism in ourselves, sometimes without even knowing it, so we have to change it in ourselves. If we all work together on these things, we can fight against racism and make the world better for me and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, Chris, Mary, and Johnny. Last month, you heard a presentation by Dr. Morrow, principals Dan Zatoon and Julio Duarte about our discipline data. And, we said that we're really taking steps. There were some things that we really need to address and examine more carefully and closely. This is an example of how we are not just hoping for change, but we're actually taking steps to make change. And some of it is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. So, I want to thank our true collaborators for this work and for being so courageous and open to the work as well. And we'll open the floor for questions or comments from you.
Thank you so much. Questions, comments?
Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful, and I really appreciate everything that you looked at, especially the analogy. The other piece that resonated with me is not only holding ourselves accountable, but also checking others, whether it's a good friend or a family member or even a colleague, because sometimes we take for granted or we say things on the flip, and we don't realize the type of impact that that can make on somebody else. And not only that, but if it's a child or teen or what have you, they hold on to that until they become an adult, and then it comes out in other forms. So I just really want to thank you, as a board member and as a parent, that you're really looking at this issue and you're really taking it seriously. I have a couple of questions. The first question is, in terms of the training, is the training district-wide, or will it be district-wide instead of, the 3 schools that you've done it in? Do you plan to do it in all the other schools as well in the district?
So one of the things that the Equity and Diversity Council does is we vet our community partners, people who reach out to us all the time and want to support our work. But we have to make sure that it's aligned with our mission, our vision, our goals, and the work that we've already been doing with cultural competence and where we want to go. So we had this fortunate opportunity, as Carrie described, to work together on curriculum, and it wasn't because there was a blind spot, it was just there was a lack of resources, even in the Connecticut Historical Society. That collaboration opened the door for more communication and talk about our work, what we're doing, and maybe piloting it at one school. And so we have had such favorable response that we have other schools that have been calling and asking, how can we bring this to our schools? So we're looking to expand the work and sustain it, at least have the conversations, open dialogue to it. It really is looking at the fit and the timing and our readiness too, and maybe doing a little push to be ready.
And the second question I had, just on the material that you provided us with, in terms of the training, when you do extend the training, will the training be extended to all of the staff and faculty in our schools? So, in other words, not just the teachers and the administration, but entire office staff and some of the other staff as well?
That is something we can certainly look at. We have a few models that we've used that worked really well. You may remember the year we had Kelvin Terrell, and we had something for our students, for the secondary students, for our teachers, for our community members, board members, town council, and then for our parents. And so we want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, and so we're thoughtful about that as well.
If I could jump in with that, it's important that things aren't compliance tasks like this. That buildings, communities, these are parent groups that are really the partnership, which is, one of the great parts of this is the partnership with parents and the school that we keep talking about, that's what we need to have. And so we're doing cultural competency training throughout the district. And I almost don't want to use the term training, because it's really what comes out of our conversations and where are we at a building and where are we as a staff, because we're all at a little bit different places. As you know, we're not cookie cutter schools. So the question about, okay, what about office staffs? What about bus? What about security? All those pieces are exactly the kind of things that we're talking about, that we identify what are those issues that seem to be common. And where are we at? And it's also part of the welcoming environments. It's clearly going to be a focus as we move forward, continuing next year, which has been, but we'll continue to talk about.
I just want to add one more thing, that for the past 2 years, we have provided training to our paras, our office staff, on cultural competence on a variety of topics, cultural competence 101, 102, LGBT matters, and just looking at even supporting students with the curriculum through that equity lens. So we have expanded those efforts.
I also echo the appreciation for what all of you are doing. Thank you so much for taking this on. And whether it be 20 years later or whatever the case may be, it certainly is a subject that needs to be addressed. So hats off to you, and a special hats off to you young people. So proud of you. Wonderful presentation. And thank you so much for taking on a subject matter that some adults don't want to take on. So I commend you, and I encourage for you to keep doing what you're doing. And I'm a mommy, and I have daughters, and unfortunately, I have experienced my daughters being told by other students that they don't want to play with them because of their skin color. And in those moments, it's important for you to know that you are a good person for who you are. And just because other people may have negative thoughts does not mean that you are a negative person. So continue to do what you're doing. We're all so proud of you.
Thank you. I also, of course, want to commend you in particular on talking about all the different aspects of it. If we don't challenge the curriculum, teachers aren't going to be aware of the ways in which they do these things, sometimes inadvertently. If we don't talk to parents, we're going to have home lives that are not necessarily going to reinforce these messages. And if we don't talk to kids, then you don't learn how to stick up for yourselves and how to stick up for each other and how to really build a new community in the future. So I think that that's great. And thank you all. I just had one quick question, which was about the participation rate. I know it's an evening, and so that's often hard for families to get out. Was there a good turnout for this sort of event?
Yeah, I think initially we were going to limit it because of the nature of the conversation, but we chose to open it up. There was a good, I don't remember exactly, there were
20 students, 20 adults?
Yeah, so I was going to say 40 to 50 people in attendance, which we were very happy with, and not only were they present, but people were very active in the conversation. So I think we were very pleased with the way it went that evening.
That's great, and I think having 20 or so students is really important because you guys can help each other, teach other kids as it goes. So bravo to all of you. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really wonderful.
Next, I would like to invite my colleagues from Wolcott Elementary School to the table. Joining me tonight are Scott Dunn and Principal Scott Dunn and Library Media Specialist Sarah Lynch. We certainly don't need research to tell us that students thrive when they see reflections of themselves in the context of teaching and learning. And further, that all students can develop a greater appreciation and respect for diversity when they are exposed to people and cultures around the world. So Wolcott Elementary School wanted to inspire students not only to read more, but to see and learn more about the diverse world around them through literature and visual arts. So I'll turn the microphone over to my colleagues, Scott and Sarah.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting Sarah and I on behalf of Wolcott School. We're thrilled to talk to you about the opportunity to share what our school community has been doing this year, committed to how we foster respect for cultural diversity, for inclusion, for awareness. And our district mission, we all know, is to prepare students to realize their full potential and to enhance our global community. But that global community really starts at the local school community level. And when we talk about one of our district goals about nurturing, that social emotional well-being, we at Wolcott, we've been really talking about what does that mean to have a self and respectful learning environment. And hopefully tonight we'll briefly be able to show you what we've been doing this year to create that nurturing community, because I frequently say that Wolcott really is truly representative of West Hartford, not only West Hartford, but also the world. So Sarah's going to start us off tonight.
Sure. Sorry, just want to apologize in advance if I'm stopping. I'm dealing with allergy situation here, so hopefully I'm okay. Don't have any coughing fits. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I just wanted to give you a little history. I've been purchasing diverse titles since I started at Wolcott as the librarian. And when I first started, I got to know my collection and started looking over what types of titles we had. And I found that many books about the African American experience were about civil rights and slavery, and they were not contemporary titles. And then I looked at things, a lot of other groups, including Native people in literature, and the picture was and is much worse. It was like they didn't exist. Many of the books, even still today, I find, speak about Native people in the past tense. It's not like they even are around anymore, which we obviously know they are, but if our students aren't aware of that, that's a problem. So we wanted to expand upon the idea of diversity through the literature in the library, murals that we have in our school, as well as events that have taken place in the library and the school. So I felt that it was important to change this. So I've been working diligently to diversify our collection. There's a movement, actually, you can see on the, on the slide here, called We Need Diverse Books. And I have had all these great books, and then I realized kids are checking them out. I had great student responses. They would say, this book looks like me, this book looks like my family. And really, really excited. But I noticed that we started looking at the titles in our curriculum. And it's back to what they were just speaking about at the first presentation, which was we needed to look at our curriculum and make sure that that was reflective of our, not only our town's population, but this global society. So I hosted a book tasting, and these are just a few of the titles that we had. Scott was kind enough to give me time at a faculty meeting. So staff really had a time to sit down, look through, preview the books, take notes on what might be a good title for them to add to their classroom collection, what they could use as a read aloud. I always try to suggest to teachers when they come in as well into the library and they might ask for a certain group of titles, I will say, here are some great new titles that still meet your curricular needs, but feature a more diverse group of characters. And I just wanted to point out that it's not just me that's doing this. You can go through, a couple of others. It's not just the books, but the other piece of it is our author visits that we have. So we've had authors and illustrators. And when we've had those, these are just some photos of some of our author and illustrator visits, which two of you, Rob and Dave, were able to come to one of ours this year. Thank you for coming to that. And when we've hosted those, we've had authors of, you can see yourself in the photo. So we've had authors, like I said, of mixed race, children of immigrants. We hosted author Grace Lynn, and her parents both immigrated from Taiwan. And on that day, we hosted her a couple years ago, but one of the students came to me and said, Mrs. Lynch, I didn't know that authors could be Asian like me. I didn't know that. And she was shocked. And she kind of hung around a little bit like a groupie that day and got to talk to her a little bit. So it was a really great experience and connection for her. If you can go back just one, the author here who visited this year, he spoke about Alex London. Both of these have visited this year, but Alex London spoke about another piece of diversity, which is not just the racial diversity, but he spoke about getting in trouble and being sent to the principal's office multiple times. He spoke about hating to read. That was his big secret. He told the students he hated to read until 5th grade, and you should have seen the looks on their faces. Wait a second, he's like me. I had students come up to me afterwards and say, oh, that's like me. I'm not a bad kid, right? He made wrong choices, but turned it around. So that was a great other piece of diversity they like to highlight as well. And then the murals. Scott is going to talk about the murals a little more, but I did want to say just one last thing. That I, as well as other librarians in the district, have been working with Ashley Callan, which is the townwide curriculum specialist for literacy and social studies. And a big focus has been the past couple of years to select titles for our ELA units and social studies units that reflect and honor the lives of as many different groups of people as possible. And I just wanted to give a special shout out to all the other librarians that without their help in this, it's really been a group effort. That's been a huge change. Roszena can attest to that we have started to change things within the curriculum as far as the titles that we're using. And that is district-wide.
Okay, so when I had transitioned to Wolcott, part of that was a transition plan where I wanted to meet one-on-one with all the adult members of our Wolcott community. So that was 83 people in total. And over the summer, having conversations, some short, some longer, and really hearing about Wolcott School and what it made so special. And all 83, every single one of them, talked about the vibrancy of our school community with a tremendous sense of pride. And so that kind of led me for a few weeks into some reflection on how do we embrace that and how do we build upon that for something that is clearly so felt by all the adult members of the school. And as I was walking down the hallways one day, we just had bare cream walls, and then the murals idea came to light. And so I partnered with Sarah, and obviously her dedication to diversity in the in literacy and text is well known tonight. But we worked together and asked all of our adult members of the Wolcott community to choose their favorite children's character from literature. So you can imagine we had 83, probably a fewer because we had multiple of the same. But it was surprising, or perhaps not as surprising to Sarah, when I came and talked to her, I'm like, let's talk about this, was just the lack of diversity in some of those characters. And yet Sarah had built such a vibrant collection within the library from students from which to choose. So that's when we partnered and chose some of those great books to really increase the circulation of those books already that Sarah had been doing. And that brought us to some of these that you see here. Last Stop on Market Street, the Grace Lynn books. Let's see if there's another one too right here. Yep, and then the next one. Yep, there we go. And that's where the mountain meets the moon. So all of these, were wonderful because they were visual representations of what was in the library that Sarah already had done. So that really turned into, like I said, an increased circulation. But what we've noticed a lot this year with kids is not only an increase in the circulation of those texts out of the library, but it's seeing students either identify characters in the hallway or, to be honest, see themselves in some of those. We have multiple conversations about that as adults in terms of students either alone or together looking at these and either embracing, their heritage or wanting to know more about somebody else's. These murals truly are, windows and mirrors relative to their lives and their experiences, not just the characters in the books that they're reading. So those murals really allowed us to really broaden the definition of diversity in an effort to raise awareness and promote appreciation. So not solely about race, but also lifestyle, gender, social model of disability. So this has been a wonderful jumpstart for us at Wolcott to get people excited about really that vibrant community that we were talking about. And then you saw there some quotes from students. It's obviously been a huge source of engagement. So I'm thrilled for the work that we've started and for students to really get excited about seeing themselves and seeing others and wanting to know more about others. So thank you for having us.
Sarah wants to say one more thing.
Sorry, I forgot to say thank you to all of you because I wanted to say thank you to the Board of Ed for supporting our schools and allowing me and others to do such important work that supports our students ultimately, right? Because it's not about me, it's about how well I can support them. And I couldn't do that without your help.
And here's me jumping in again. All of those murals, and if we welcome you to come to Wolcott, I know some of you have and have seen, it's quite impressive and it spans quite a large area of our school, but that was completely funded by our generous PTO, some of whom are here tonight, one of our PTO presidents, but also the West Hartford Foundation. So that would not have occurred without those two organizations.
So we hope that you feel inspired to go take a visit, reach out to Sarah and to Scott, visit and see the murals for yourself. They are so incredible. It really enhances what's already a vibrant school community and the inspiration for students to want to read more, to talk about literature. I heard students talking about Harry Potter today, and the boy said, "Did you read the book?" And the girl said, "Well, I watched the movie." He said, "That's not good enough." So we invite you to visit, and we'll open the floor for any questions or comments from you.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, thank you. Scott, you got me on one of the questions. I was going to ask, where did the funding come from? So that's great. Both the Foundation for West Hartford Public Schools and the PTO were able to team together on that. That's wonderful, because this time, as members of the board, when we're talking about the budget, we don't get into such, minutiae is the wrong word, we don't get that far down into it. So it's great to know, though, that although we're not able to particularly support something like this, there are avenues to help that out. That's wonderful. And Roszena, I want to just point out, I'm aware well, we've had a couple of schools as examples. I know I had a chance to visit Duffy on a night where they introduced some similar books, and one of the books that Scott mentioned again was Last Stop on Market Street, and they talked about all the diverse characters on the bus. And for me, the one that struck me, you can see the different colors of skin and stuff like that, but there was a guy with tattoos, and me growing up as a kid, I only knew one person with a tattoo. That was my grandfather, and so anybody with a tattoo might be a little scary for me. But this book kind of says, this guy was actually pretty nice on the bus. And so it's neat. And then at the end of the night, we all got a copy of the book to take home. And my wife stole it for her classroom. So that's it. But thank you all for the efforts you're doing in all the different schools.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to follow up as you all did as well. So.
Oops. I just want to piggyback on Dave's point to just say what, of course, but just to point out to the audience that while it is so important for students to be able to see themselves in these examples and in the curriculum as well, it's also so important for white students to see that, for male students to see that girls can be engineers, for white students to see that African Americans can be, right, that all that diversity is not just feel good for individuals who are those groups, but that in fact everybody learns that everybody can do anything. So thank you for both those perspectives. I'm sorry.
Dave said we don't really get into the minutia and the word or the details. But, sometimes we do. And, we have a painting budget that we have to pay someone to paint it white, where we could just go with this in all the schools and save some money. There we go, right? So there is a way to segue that in, right? So we can implement this in all the schools.
Again, thank you for that. Question for me, and Scott, I know that you just arrived, so I guess the question is for both of you. Have you seen, in the short period of time that you've began to look at the books and change them around to reflect a lot of the students, have you seen any differences in the students' behavior overall towards each other, being a little more inclusive to other students who kind of, are usually a little more isolated or, standoffish or what have you?
Definitely, because I incorporate it into lessons. So, for instance, we do talk about things like, is this a girl book, or is this a boy this, or trade, or whatever, career, right? And I actually had students just the other day talking, and I heard someone say, well, girls can only do this. And someone said, but we read a book about that, remember? And they actually spoke about that. We also had, there's a title, it's called Trombone Shorty. It won the Coretta Scott King Award a couple of years ago. And I read that with all second graders when we intro unit about famous Americans. He's an African-American trombone player from New Orleans, Grammy-nominated, amazing musician. If you ever get a chance, go see him live. And the students, that's one thing we talk about, is he grew up poor. And they ask, well, so how did he do it? He found a trombone, literally, that someone else was throwing away. And I've had other kids say, oh, I can do that. He's like me. He's growing up like I do. And they do see themselves and see you're painting a map that is not, that shows greater possibilities than they may even know at this point. But when they see it in a book, it's, to me, and also for them, I've definitely heard and seen changes in behavior for that. Does that kind of answer? Okay.
And for me, like you had said, this is my first year, so I don't have much of a historical perspective. But if I compare it to the other districts that I've been in my 25 years, I'd have to say I've never been in a building where students really think and use their words and their actions relative to how they treat each other and their differences. So I'm very impressed and I'm very excited, and I think that goes to a lot of our PBIS work, a lot of the work that Sarah and the general ed teachers do to partner to really foster that acceptance and appreciation.
You got me thinking when you said, oh, a girl can't do that. I think it was 2 years ago, I'm a Little League World Series fan, and there was a African-American woman, and they said, throw like a girl. And what that really meant was like, throw the best baseball you could ever throw, because she was incredible. And I think the Little League came out with something, and I don't know if it was a book or video or something, but it was pretty inspiring, because, throw like a girl didn't mean, it really meant like, wow, this girl is awesome. And I think that was the title of it, but it might be.
Monet Davis was.
Yeah, she was incredible. And I think they actually made like a video or a book about it, and it's pretty incredible. And when you said it, I thought of that.
We do have a book that's called Throw Like a Girl. Yeah.
So once again, thank you, and please visit.
Thank you.
So last but not least, I'd like to welcome our guest presenters from Hall High School to the table, and Assistant Principal Shelley Solomon will introduce the high school presentation and guest speakers briefly from the podium while they're getting set up. Yesterday, Tom Moore and I met with several graduating seniors at both high schools, as we do every year, and they reflected on their favorite grade levels and their most tricky grade levels. And they gave us really useful information that made us think differently. But they also made us very proud of them and of our district. And we know that high schoolers are very busy, and this is a very busy time for you, right? So we appreciate that they're taking their time out to be here tonight with everything else that they have to balance. But for this group of leaders, they thought it was really, really important to have their voices be heard in a way that would foster growth for our teachers and help them to be more culturally responsive in their practice. And so recently, during their early release Wednesday, they led and engaged adults in professional learning. And I'll let Ms. Solomon and our Hall speakers talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for having us here tonight to provide you with a glimpse of our work around building our cultural competency at Hall. We are indeed, all of us, on a journey to ensure that all of our students feel safe, secure, and valued, and that as a faculty, we are providing our students a learning environment that is culturally responsive and inclusive. To that end, this is our second in a series of student-led CSIs, because we believe strongly that student voice is an essential component in our work to increase our cultural competency. And so at our most recent CSI this year, on April 18th, we involved a panel of students representing our students of color, our ESL students, and our LGBTQIA community. Members of each of these groups were asked to respond to specific questions that served as guiding questions for the panel discussions that each group had with the faculty. In addition, we created PowerPoints for the staff that incorporated the student responses, included instructional strategies that can be used in the classroom, and resources for each of the groups. The guiding questions that the students responded to were: 1, do you feel that you are a welcomed member of our community? Why or why not? Do you feel that being a student of color, an ESOL student, or a member of the LGBTQIA community has played a role in your experiences at Hall? Please explain. And has your identity affected you in positive and or negative ways at school? Please explain. What do you want your teachers to know about you as an individual? And the last question, what do you need from your teachers to be successful as a learner? It is now my honor to introduce you to 3 of our panelists who will share with you some of the salient points that they shared with the faculty. Omar Khalil is here representing the ESOL students. Jace Hamilton is here representing our students of color. And Charlie Townswick is representing our LGBTQIA community.
Hi everyone, my name is Jace Hamilton and I'm a sophomore at Hall. And tonight, as Ms. Solomon said, I'll be representing the students of color at Hall. So a lot of kids might be sports kids or music kids, but personally I've always been a social justice kind of kid for as long as I could remember. And I remember also experiencing racism since maybe first grade is when it really hit me how it impacted me as a kid at my school, which was predominantly white, and I went to Morley. So recently, there was an incident in one of my English classes because we have an assignment where someone brings in an article that has to do with the lens that we have in the English class, which could be class or race or gender, and we had been doing race. So during the assignment, someone brought in an article and a lot of racially charged comments were made, and I felt extremely disrespected, so I took myself away from the situation and I went to my counselor and I explained the situation, and my teacher, who had not known what would happen, she felt so terrible, and she helped me go to administration, and I talked to Ms. Solomon about it, and we came up with a solution, which was a presentation for the faculty. So I created this PowerPoint for the faculty, and I actually have it with me, and we presented it at the last CSI, along with a student-led panel of other students of different races, and I think that it made me realize how most of our teachers are so unaware of how big a problem that racism is in our school, even though racism is obviously a problem, but it's kind of, sometimes it might be like swept under the rug or seen as kind of a taboo or controversial topic to talk about in classrooms, which made me really upset because even though it may be uncomfortable to talk about, I still believe that it needs to be talked about. So one of the questions that we were asked is essentially, what do you want your teacher to know about you as an individual? And I have some student quotes, which one of them said, "Don't be afraid to speak about it. It's not taboo and it's okay to ask questions." And another said, "I want my teachers to know that I am just as capable as everyone else." And those two quotes really spoke to me because even though it doesn't say the name of the students, a lot of our students, we spoke about it as a group and they all agreed that this is how they all felt, and that really resonated with me. And personally, I wanted my teachers to know that especially all the students that were on the student panel and a lot of my other peers at my school that are of different races would be so happy to help teachers educate our peers on how race impacts us or how race is seen through our perspective so that they can further understand it. Thank you.
Okay, Charlie.
Oh.
Hi, representatives of the West Hartford Board of Education. My name is Charlie Townsend, and I'm a junior at Hall High. Today I'm going to be speaking about the climate of the LGBT community in Hall High School and how we handle issues of homophobia and transphobia. Of course, it's no secret that these have been rampant since far before I was high school age, but recently discussions of LGBT rights in the news, for example, the Supreme Court case about the gay couple and their wedding cake, have brought a lot of discussion of LGBT events specifically to Hall High. So this has propelled lots of activism among myself and other students with the administration, who I believe generally want to help us. So through raising our voices, we've done things such as gotten gender-neutral bathrooms for transgender students at Hall High School, succeeded in changing the National Link Crew application to have a non-binary option. And Link Crew is an organization of which I'm a member, and it's formed of upperclassmen who guide freshmen and new incoming students. So that's a really big deal. And we've held workshops and panels, like Jace has said, educating faculty about certain issues, because I truly think that we do want to help. We're also working on other things, such as ensuring that in the new science building that's built, we have gender-neutral facilities for trans students who want to use them then, and creating an environment where Hall High School LGBT students feel safer in general. As an openly non-binary, openly lesbian student, I think that many of my teachers are understanding and respectful, and still more of them want to be able to help me and support me throughout being a student, but don't quite know how. I think I feel welcome in theory because Shelley Solomon and other administrators have told me that they want to help the LGBT community, but I also still face problems of harassment with other students. So I was asked what I would like to tell, what I would like faculty and teachers at Hall High to know, and so here are some things. The number one thing I said was to be sure to always use the name that we specify in class. I changed my name legally to Charlie, and I'm very thrilled that no one remembers my previous name, honestly. But my peers generally get their names used, and that's very good. That doesn't happen at most schools. So that's something that WHPS does very well on. Teachers are in a position of leadership, and they're role models for everyone. So if a teacher misgenders me or calls me the wrong gender in class, then my peers are going to do it as well. And many of my teachers try and make mistakes, and that's always better than just making the mistake, I would say. So it's very important that they practice pronouns. For example, I use they, them. And so teachers over the year always get better at using they, them for me, and that shows me that I'm respected at Hall High. And sometimes teachers call me he by mistake, or they call me she, and they always correct themselves, the teachers that I have better relationships with. And that is something that I think Hall High does very well. The other couple of things that I want to say are, for example, a lot of efforts to include current events as a topic of discussion in class can often, if it's about LGBT topics, it often turns the classroom into a place of debate on the humanity of LGBT people unintentionally. And so they also assume that nobody in the class is LGBT, which can put people like me feel on the spot and make us feel kind of pressured to stick up for our community when other people are saying like, oh, well, why should they be able to get married? Or, oh, why should they have civil rights? And so a lot of teachers, like Jay said, don't intend this, but it happens. And so in cases like this, I want our teachers to know that it's always best to kind of stick up for us and kind of keep the conversation on track. In history classes, for example, I think that there have been a lot of opportunities to include LGBT curriculum that have not been used. Something that I liked that a teacher did last year was we were learning about President Roosevelt, and she mentioned that he had affairs with other women because it was relevant to the class. And then she's like, oh, Eleanor Roosevelt also had affairs with women. And I was like, oh, that's like such an easy way to acknowledge that LGBT people have always existed, even though having affairs is bad. There was also, in a recent class that I took, we were discussing the Red Scare, and I'm like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity where we could be talking about the Lavender Scare, which is a form of the communist scare that happened specifically to LGBT people before that. So there are always opportunities to bring up LGBT history because we've always existed, and I'd love for my teachers to take more advantage of that. The last thing I want to say is that I really appreciate when my teachers take the time to call out students that use hate language and slurs, especially in the hallways or even when like a teacher's not on duty, if they still hear something and they report it, because lots of my friends and I have reported certain people for using hate speech in the hallway and for harassing other people. And it doesn't always, sometimes it's hard to give these people consequences and they can get away with a slap on the wrist. But if a teacher hears it as well and helps me out, then it's very helpful towards making sure that we have a safe environment and that people don't use hate speech. So thank you so much for listening to what I had to say, and I really appreciate my allies on the Hall High School staff who stick up for the LGBT community and strive for an environment that is safer and more accepting and inclusive, especially in June during Pride Month. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Omar Khalil. I'm a junior at Hall High School. I came to Hall High School this year after being in Hartford school for 1 year. I'm a refugee from Syria, but I spent 4 years in Jordan before I came to this country. I love being at Hall because the learning program is more useful than when I was in the learning program is in Hall High School more useful than when I was in Hartford Public High School. I love living in West Hartford because there's so much to do. I have learned so many things since I came West Hartford. I like being member of the panel for teacher and helping the teacher understand about ESL students. We explained that ESL students are unique and that we came to this country for different reasons. Some are refugee like me, some are immigrants coming to be with family for a better life, and some because their parents have work opportunities in this country, and that some of us have had more educational opportunities than the other. I can tell you that ESL students all feel welcome at Hall High School, but sometimes we feel bad that we cannot always participate in class because we don't know the language and things move too fast. We told the teacher that we want them to know to help us be successful. Some of the things that we told the teacher that we need them to do is, one, be patient, and we are trying. 2, slow down so we can understand what you say. 3, explain things that in different words, not just repeat what you have already said. 4, understand that we don't feel comfortable with the presentation, or that when you say work with a partner and we don't have one, we feel embarrassed. Thank you.
So, it's hard enough, as Lorna said, for adults to have these conversations, but our youngsters, our teenagers, they show that they have the moral courage and they've got the intestinal fortitude to speak up, and they've been great models for us. We hear them recognize the adults as mentors and sources of empowerment, but they find that this is so important, and we say that there's an art and science and education to teaching, and I think that just listening and hearing students' voices and understanding their experiences, it's just a real simple thing that we can do. It really doesn't cost anything. Just ask and just listen. So I want to applaud them for being here tonight and for speaking up and for the courageous work that they have been doing with the teachers. We were trying to figure out a respectful way to present this because this is part of a longer presentation. And so what we've done was we have taken excerpts from their presentations, just the cover screen of their slide of their presentations, but the extensive presentations are on the Equity and Diversity Council webpage of WHPS. So it's under whps.org/EDC. And just as I missed your slide, but I'm sorry. But that goes to what Charlie talked about, that when you have a misstep, just acknowledge it. When you have a question, you don't know, don't make assumptions, and just apologize and move forward. We staged that. But most importantly, let's talk about it. So this is where you can find the full version of our PowerPoint presentations. We'll open the floor for questions from you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, but thank you also to the teachers and to you who had the insight to ask students to actually say what they needed instead of, as usual, us trying to figure out what the students needed by guesswork. So thank you guys for sharing, and thank the teachers for listening and making a difference. Comments?
So as a board member and a parent that has 3 kids in the school system, I'm always very proud of our school system and our diversity and the things that you guys do. And as board members, we often brag about just like this thing right here, is that the equity and diversity and the work that you do, and we proudly talk about it. I also had the pleasure of meeting with about 10 to 12 students at Hall yesterday after Mr. Moore had warmed them up. Actually, it was a different crowd. He put them to sleep. Thank God. But it was an honor to be there, and I spoke with 10 of them for about an hour. And I really wanted to get what their high school experience was like, not senior year, not even Hall in particular, but just their school, their system. And we went around the table and everybody was engaged and it was a conversation and it went fantastic, right? It went really well. It went one way and then it went another and it was really good. And at the end of it, a girl student came up to me and said, I didn't really say much because I didn't really agree with everything they said. I am a student of color, and my experience is much different. And so we went on to talk for about 5-6 more minutes, and I wrote some things down, and I was really, I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but it really kind of touched me a little bit because, you guys, everybody, put so much work into this, and that, and I always kind of hang our hat on, like, not in our school system. Our school system treats everybody correctly and does well, right? So I don't know if sad is the right word either, but I was concerned, very concerned about it. And she talked about how, as a student of color, she's not looking at the teacher in the front of the same color and things like that, and that sometimes people say, "Hey, are you an open choice student?" And she lives here in West Hartford, and so it was just it concerned me, and I talked to the appropriate people about it to make them aware, and I know that every day that teachers go to that school and. Roszena, the work you do and just the administration, I know that every day, it's a continuous improvement model and we're always there. And that really wasn't a complaint. What I talked about, it was more of just, this is what I heard. And then, as I delved into the problem or the issue at hand, I was getting stories about, and I didn't even realize this, but there's school systems around us like Simsbury, I think Avon and Farmington that do an ABC course where they take underprivileged kids from Boston, New York, Chicago, and they have a home here in the city, or in that particular city, like Simsbury, and they live with a family for 4 years and such. And I've heard the story how some of those students, they do very well, and then they'll get asked, "Oh, are you in the ABC program?" And "Oh, I live here in Simsbury." So it's not only our school system, it's out there, and I know that. We're doing everything we can, but I share that just because kind of, I don't know, it was a great conversation with the kids and I wanted to walk away with a great smile and I couldn't because I knew that particular student was hurting a little bit and she didn't have the same experience as that. And we need to get to a place where, we don't even have to talk black, white, brown, it doesn't matter, right? We're people, right? And that's where we have to be at some point very, very soon so that we don't have to, we can talk about issues, right? Rob and I may not get along on an issue, but that's all it is. It's an issue. So someday in the near future, I hope we can just talk about issues that you have with people and not race, and you guys are, really at, I don't want to even say the forefront, but continuing that effort. And I applaud you for it and thank you.
I just want to say I appreciate your comments and leaving. I wouldn't leave disappointed. We heard some of the same things, and when I talk to kids and I hear that, I'm thrilled that they have voice to say it. And because institutionally, the one thing I don't want us ever to be, and it's so easy to be, is defensive. I feel plenty of the time, somebody says something to me, and all I want to say is, don't you know what we're trying to do? Don't you know what Dan's trying to do? Don't you know what Shelley's trying to do? That this is what keeps us awake at night. But when we do that, we don't listen. And so the key element to this program, which I love so much, is listen. And that doesn't mean that I agree with 100% of everything that every child says, because I don't agree with 100% of what anybody says. But do I hear it? Do I hear it and do I see somebody else's perspective? And so for these kids to have the courage, I just want to say as superintendent, to help us and to make us see things that we might not see, because when you do something every day, it's easy not to see it. And so I just thank you so much for doing this and sharing with your staff. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Tom, because, you know, and I struggled for a word there. And courage really was a great word, and that you used, because she had the courage. She doesn't know me, right? I'm the Board of Ed. She has no idea what that, you know, and doesn't know my name or anything, but she had the courage to come up to me. And you're right, you know, it wasn't disappointment. I struggled, and then you heard me struggle. But it was, and I felt like I walked away, and I really did. I actually walked away kind of happy, because there was someone that reached out that I am not in that chain of command whatsoever. I'm not involved in every day. You know, I went in, actually I did it kind of on purpose, is I went in shorts and kind of a t-shirt type thing, so I didn't come in with a tie, and, you know, and so yes, courage, and I was happy when I walked away. It's like, wow, you know, that was a great group, and I'm glad that conversation came the way it did. Yeah.
I also want to thank you for coming forward tonight, and in your school as well. I think the easy thing to do when you encounter a problem in the classroom or in the hallway, anywhere at school, is to just get upset and complain. But what you three have done is to get upset and do something about it in a very appropriate and mature way, and we will all be the better for that, so I want to thank you for that. I think this has been a great idea to start a conversation with the teachers and administrators of our schools to help them see what you need to be successful as learners in our school. And I think the next step seems to be helping your fellow students learn how to have these complicated conversations that need to be had in your classes. If you're going to have an English class that looks at literature and news articles through a lens of race or gender identity or class, then you need to be able to have an appropriate conversation about those topics without offending the other people who are in the room. And this is really hard for adults and for kids, but there are models of teaching people how to communicate their experiences, their opinions in ways that are more inclusive and are not offensive. And I hope that we can continue the dialogue that's begun so that eventually it trickles to the student level, where our students know how to have these conversations towards a more robust learning environment for everybody. And I really appreciate the work that you all are doing, and keep it up.
Grace?
I also want to thank you guys so much and commend you. And I want to say that also as a high school student, I know how it feels to try to change the minds and make realizations to adults. And I do that a lot. And I understand, and it's really hard. And it's amazing that I see other people at Hall doing it. So thank you guys for also being advocates and activists in your community. And are any of you seniors? You guys are all okay. So as I graduate, I really want to tell you guys to finish, keep working really hard and keep telling the adults and trying to progress the community that you're in and inspire other leaders to come up that are younger than you as well. So yeah, I really just thank you for everything that you guys have done. And it's hard, and it takes a lot of courage. And it means a lot that you guys are standing up and you feel comfortable enough in your community that you can do this. And that just says something about West Hartford Public Schools as a whole, that there are students that feel comfortable and they're brave enough to step up and try to change something that needs to be changed.
A comment and then a question. The comment is to all of you and also to the kids that were here earlier. I wanted to say something I didn't, but I just want to commend you guys, and people are saying courage, but a word that just kind of strikes me is guts. It takes guts to speak out, not just in front of a group of people like this, but in your everyday lives. And so I hope you continue to do that. People often like to use the phrase, it takes a village, but I'm a big believer in that it takes individuals to step up and do the right thing and to be that voice, be that change. And so to each and every one of you, and also to the kids that were here earlier because they were fifth graders, I mean, just amazing. Great. Thank you for coming out tonight. My question is to Roszena. We heard a lot about different groups and racism and trying to open people's eyes to things out there. How do you incorporate our special needs community in this way, as far as the racism or the things that they face from people?
Well, this year we have started to talk more about the intersectionality between race and disability, special needs communities as well. And so when we talk about inclusive environments, it's not just limited to, race, ethnicity, but it's about ability, religion, faith, sexual orientation, your identity. So we sometimes refer to them as the othered group, that we look at other groups beyond just race, beyond just LGBT population communities. And so we do take an account for our special needs population. And Unified Theater is one of those platforms that we really access and try to promote even more, so that we can raise awareness and get more people to join in the work and raise awareness, so that we are truly living to our philosophy of inclusion. And that includes our students who have special needs.
I think that's great. Like Unified Theater and Unified Sports are two great ways to incorporate that community. But are there other things that are being done, or ideas that are going to be incorporated along these lines that would be helpful? And it's just a community that gets, I think, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance and how we treat that community. So I would just hope that there are more things besides Unified Theater and Unified Sports.
No, absolutely. And I don't mean to limit it to that, but that's one of the avenues that really gets people's attention, get them to come out and start listening and thinking more about it. But we have our mandated programs, obviously, but beyond that, just getting students more aware of their peers, their abilities. And I guess when we look at our cultural competence continuum, we're looking at our own biases about all people, and privilege and access to opportunities, and that includes our special needs population, but then trying to reach out to more of the general education population to practice, to put into practice some of the philosophies, some of the strategies, so that we can be more responsive to their needs as well. When we talk about cultural responsiveness, we're talking about all people, not just people of color, not just the LGBT community, but all people. We do have we have practice around reaching out people of different abilities.
I think I'm really glad you bring it up, Rob, if I could jump in, Roszena,
Yeah.
I mean to interrupt. Because this is an area that I think we've seen a shift in education. Just like, schools have changed somewhat since you were in kindergarten. Schools have changed since we were in school. And the notion of special education students, the idea that those are your kids, you're the special education teacher, and this is my class, and well, how are you getting them up? That's the thing that I think we've seen a dramatic shift in, just in practice day to day. There's other groups, as you said, Unified Theater, Unified Sports, Circle of Friends. We go through that list, but there's a mindset that I think American education has an issue with in terms of ownership of who our kids are. And are these kids labeled as our kids, or do we use labels to separate? And that's the danger that I think, we don't want to get into that identity where everything divides. And I think having general education teachers, having ownership, because each child is their child. I think after school activities, we are seeing more and more where it's not just in Unified, where it's not just in a club, but we have somebody on the baseball team, sitting with the team on the bench. These kind of things that we're seeing more of. We're not there yet. Part of it is meeting with parents, part of it is making sure we have enough support. But it is something that's a key part of cultural competency that we need to make sure we're always focusing on not just the things that we see every day, or we have somebody saying, I want to speak up for this. We want to make sure that we're doing that. I'm glad you brought it up, because it is something we can always certainly do more, and defensiveness would be an enemy there.
And we've had a presentation this year, at both of the high schools, with student representatives who receive special education services, to hear their voices too. They're not at the table tonight, but they're not forgotten, and we had them at the table for Equity and Excellence presentation this time last year, just so that we could hear their voices too, and that they feel included. I strongly believe, and my background is special education as well, that we have a very strong inclusion philosophy in just bridging that gap between general ed and special ed. And I often refer to it as general ed, not regular ed.
Thank you.
Roszena, you've done a fantastic job. I mean, I'm just sitting here and I'm just like boiling over with everything that you've done with the Equity and Diversity Council and everybody that you've brought forth tonight, and just everything that you're doing all year. And to the group of young students that are sitting here before us, I just want to say it warms my heart, because one, everybody talked, gave you all the comments, the bravery, the leadership, but you're representing your student body. So just keep in mind the number of students that you're representing for some reason who are unable to step up. You're stepping up for those students, and you're representing them. And as you go forward, this is going to give you a platform and a voice. So you have a story to tell, and I want you to hold on to that and just continue to improve it. So congratulations, and just continue to keep up that good work.
We appreciate that you have prioritized this presentation on your agenda tonight, and we thank you for your support and invite you to continue to join our work in the upcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. And now we return to our regularly scheduled program of public communications, if the public is still here and interested in speaking. I have one person on the list, Sarah Raskin, but if there are others, you should feel free to come up afterwards.
Roszena?
Okay.
Just say your name and address.
My name's Sarah Raskin, and I live at 193 North Quaker Lane in West Hartford. I'm happy to speak to the board, the superintendent, and the members of the Rethinking School Start Time Committee. I want to first thank you all for your careful, thoughtful work, and speak just a little to the survey that they're going to be presenting you. But it's hard to follow that amazing. One of the first rules of survey research is never give no change as an option. Humans don't like change. Change is hard. And let's face it, nowhere is that more true than in the land of steady habits. What's more, on this survey, no change was contrasted with huge unknowns. How much later is later? How much earlier is earlier? What about the extracurriculars? And yet, despite this, only 26% responded that they wanted no change, and 68% reported they wanted later start times at the high school level. This, in addition to the petition signed by 600 and the 35 separate people who've spoken to you, says that you have the support of a sizable number of stakeholders, and at least we can say there's no evidence of overwhelming opposition. But the truth is, I'm much more concerned about the health of our children. Only 16% reported getting the required amount of sleep. This is shocking, and this is a true public health crisis in our town. The survey also asked what people think that the effect of start time change will have on things like the ability to stay focused, behavior in the classroom, physical health, safety, academic performance. We have so much excellent data that tells us the actual effects of changing start times that we don't need to ask what people think. We don't ask parents if they think we should serve beer at football games or if they think kids should take PE. It's really important to hear parent concerns on things like schedules, but not on things like scientific effects of start times on health. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's just bad parenting. Enforce a strict bedtime. But the science is clear, and I hope that you have heard it. Teens are not biologically able, okay, your kid's different, but most teens are not biologically able to fall asleep before 11 or 12, and the survey data holds that up. I know you're also thinking we're coddling kids. They should get ready for work. But the Department of Labor says that U.S. workers get to work at 8:18 and start work at 8:30. Not 7:30, what a bunch of slackers. But if we want to get our kids ready for work, we just need to get them to school by 8:30. What about screens? Screens are important. Not looking at screens before bedtime is important, but it's a separate issue. It's like saying, I don't need to exercise if I have a healthy diet. Exercise serves one purpose, diet serves another, both are important. You have the chance to make a difference in the lives of all West Hartford public school children, to affect rates of illness, immune status, mental illness, motor vehicle accidents, sports injuries, and maybe even suicide. Change is hard, but sometimes we have to do what's hard. If there was lead in the water, asbestos in the hallway, mold in the walls, a person on staff who was a threat to our children, or an infestation of those tiny little weird red bugs, I don't even know what they are, but I hate them, you would not hesitate to act. You would acknowledge the difficulties, the cost, and you would act. The science here is clear. Given the science, there is no choice but to act. Thank you. Can I just say real quick, I know I'm out of time, I'm sorry. We're holding a conference on October 16th at Trinity College that will include speakers on school start times and transportation companies that have told us repeatedly for every district there is a no-cost or a low-cost transportation option to moving start times. So they'll be at Trinity. It'll be a free conference. I strongly invite, welcome warmly any of you to attend, and I can send you all more information.
Thank you, Sarah. That's fine. Just come, state your name, address, and speak to us.
Jane Robinson, 21 Ledyard Road. I've spoken before. I'm on the last of my 3 kids, and I just want to reinforce that the school system ultimately is for our children. And I noticed there was a divergence in the responses of the teachers that are used to coming in at the same time. And I understand that it'll impact their lives, but I am concerned about the health of my child and the health of the children that will continue to come through the school system. And I also recognize that people have said sports, it's going to be a problem because of the other towns. We're a town that leads, not a town that follows. And that's just something that I want people to remember. If we do the right thing, other people will probably follow us. If we do the wrong thing, they'll be like, well, West Hartford didn't do it, so why should we do it? So let's be the leader, let's do the right thing, let's change start times for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay. Hi, I'm Joey Snyder, sophomore at Hall High School. Do you need the address? Or that?
Please.
Yeah, 65 Lexington Road. And although I'm a sophomore at Hall, I'm going to be advocating for King Philip Middle School here. Because I feel like middle school is often part of the school system that can get overlooked, seen as just, the transition between elementary and high school. But it actually serves an important purpose in building a foundation for the education in high school. So the problem with King Philip right now is the infrastructure of the school is very poor shape, and it's actually posing threats to student safety with ceiling tiles falling down and water leaking through the ceiling. These are only patched up with jerry-rigged patch of cardboard and duct tape or a bucket to catch the falling water. I sent out a survey to the students of King Philip, and I got many responses about the state of the school, a lot of them being negative. Students are saying ceiling tiles are coming too close to falling on students than they should be. And this doesn't just pose a threat to student safety, it also poses a threat to their state of mind, as studies have shown that a general atmosphere of dilapidation can affect their, motivation and commitment to their work. You can imagine if this room were in much worse shape, it would be hard to be taking everything seriously. It would be hard for those kids to take their work seriously in a school that's in poor shape as well. So I'd just like to make the point that I think there should be more focus on that area.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other comments, observations? Please. And while you're coming up, I just want to remind everybody, while we can't respond to anything from up here, we do hear you and we are paying attention.
Hi there, I'm Lance Goldberg, 26 Brenway Drive, and I've spoken to you before about later school starting time, and just want to reiterate again what Sarah said and how important it is for our kids to be healthy, to be safe. The science is clear, and as I said to you many months ago, I trust that you guys will figure out a way to put it all together, because it is complicated. It is scary. We know other districts have done it. They've been successful. In Minneapolis, again, 20 years they've done it. That's a big city. Somehow they pulled it off and they've stuck to it. And I do think that if we were to do it, other districts would look and figure out a way to do it. I really think that there are a number of districts in the area that are leaders, and as one of them, I think other ones would look at us and be very interested to see how we pulled it off. So thank you again.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. I have everybody's name if you don't mind. I appreciate that. There's no unfinished business. And we've already begun our new business, so now let's jump right into our second piece of new business, which is the topic that was on so many of your minds, rethinking school start times, and hearing about the survey with Mr. Paul Vicinus and Ms. Ann McKernan. Oh, did I skip you? I'm sorry. Sorry. I circled B and then skipped A.
Good evening. We're back to share with you the results of our survey, and I believe that you have a copy of that short document for you to look over in your spare time. We'd like to hit the high-level points of the survey because, as you can see, that there were a lot of groups and a lot of questions. So we'll try to hit all the high-level points, certainly open to any questions you have, and I think you have an abundance of information to look at as well. So I'd like to start off by, again, I always like to start by thanking the committee. These were volunteers, and just as a reminder, there were 22 people on our committee. That was teachers, parents, students, and some administrators, and I was privileged to work with them. I asked for a group of open-minded folks to come to the table and take a hard look at this, and I got my wish, so they were great to work with. Moving through our presentation, I'll start off with our timeline. Our stakeholder impact subcommittee was the group that put this together, and there were, I believe, 5 people on that. We worked from September through April initially looking at, well, what kind of questions would we ask and how would we ask, and looking at samples from Massachusetts and other Connecticut districts. And eventually we found a partner in Hanover Research Group, which we actually are a member through a consortium. So this was a terrific opportunity because it was a cost that was already spent. It was something that we are part of, so this was no additional dollars to get a group to help us. And they work with schools and nonprofits and corporations. We went through a question design process with them in March and opened our survey for approximately 1 month. And since they delivered the raw data and the preliminary results in May, and we've been spending time putting together your report and presentation. That's our background. This was our response rate by group. We did have 7,218 total responses to the survey. Of those, we had we surveyed all of our secondary students and had almost a 70% response rate. We had approximately 30% response rate from our parents, and that is elementary, middle, and high school parents, which is in line with what Mr. Chip Ward tells us is common for our climate survey. So I was pleased to see that. And we surveyed our staff. Beyond our teachers, we asked our TAs, office, and pairs to respond, and we had approximately 45% response rate. Oops, going too fast already. Okay. One question I was most interested in after all this work was, hi, do you know what we're doing? And what we found was about a third of people did not. About a third of the people had some understanding. And then the last third actually were either moderately, very, or extremely familiar with what we were doing. So I didn't know exactly how to take that, but I know people's lives are busy, and this may not be the center of their world. But I thought that was an interesting thing to share with you. We asked the children directly about when they go to bed. And we found that we had 2,900 a little over 2,900 responses to that high school question. And we are seeing about 70% are going, when they wake up, we had about 70% of our kids waking up before 6:30. Remember, high school starts at 7:30, so I put that line there to recognize about 70% are getting up, reportedly, by 6:30 every day. But that's, they're getting up because they have to be at school. So what time are they going to bed is our big question. And we are finding that there's a wide range, but only about 20% are going to bed, let's say, with that 8 hours before that, by 10:30. And then there's a variety of times, as you can see. With some people, is 7% of the children reporting going to bed after 1 a.m. This is disaggregated, so these were just the high school responses. Initially, I had them with the middle school, but I'm going to show you the middle school separately because it is a very different pattern with the middle school. With the middle school, we had students waking up later. Obviously, they start school later. They do wake up a little bit later. They start school at 8 o'clock. And you have a great group waking up between 6 and 7, large percentage of children. When do they go to bed? The pattern is different than the high school here, with more children going to bed before 10, and then next largest group 10:30, by 10:30, and as you can see on the way down. So a very different pattern. Initially I had that together and I thought that didn't tell a good story, so we separated that out for you. We asked, probably one of the most important questions you would be interested in is, how satisfied are you with the current high school start times? And this question went to high school students, high school parents, and high school staff. So I want to be clear that elementary did not answer high school questions. Middle school did not answer high school questions, and vice versa, and we disaggregated by that. And so our parents are showing that there's a group, about 20% are completely dissatisfied, and another group, about 30%, that are also slightly dissatisfied. There is a group that is neither, they didn't kind of comment on it, and then showing you under 10% somewhat satisfied, and then a group completely satisfied. So you kind of see a range, kind of a breakout there. But the students showed some significant dissatisfaction. A lot of students somewhat dissatisfied. Give you a minute to kind of take it in, because there's a lot of groups there. And I think the difference here we see is the staff is more satisfied with the start time of 7:30. If you add, the two right bars there, that's a larger percentage. If you had the two left bars, it would be shorter. I can get you a copy of this too and post it if you want to see it that way. I'm going to take a couple of minutes so you can. Okay. So we asked the next question is, what would be your preferred start time? And we did not give times because we are still working with you on what those might be, but we did say, well, when would you prefer?
And, the preference came out, the strongest percentage for the high school parent came out as slightly later. Second was where they are now, and the third was much later. So you see the same pattern with the children, that slightly later is preferred, and then kind of now and very later is even, almost even. The staff is, again, like what we showed in the previous slide, pretty content, pretty happy with where we are right now. Again, I'll give you a minute to take that in. And I just said this one had, this was question number 80, it had over 3,000, close to 4,000 responses altogether. Had the same two questions now at the middle school level. We'll start to see some differences. The middle school level, you see kind of a wider range, but you see some more completely satisfied parents where they are. And if you added the right two bars, you'd probably be getting to about 45, 48% of people are more satisfied there. The children, you're seeing the highest bar at somewhat dissatisfied. It's kind of, we were joking, I have a middle schooler, kind of every answer, right? A lot of answers in the middle school because, a lot of, maybe kids who are not struggling at all and kids who are hitting that adolescent period and are struggling more. So we saw a little bit of everything. And again, I am a middle school parent, I understand that. The staff, again, shows the same kind of satisfaction with where we are. So then we asked, what's your preferred time? In the middle school, for parent, current or slightly later. For student, slightly later. And for staff, current times. This had about 1,877 responses. We did have a higher response rate at high school level, both of students and parents and staff. So our highest numbers are at that level because we had the highest response rates of, all of the groups there. So we asked the same two questions for our elementary school folks. And there you're going to see much more satisfaction with the current start time. Elementary parents are pretty satisfied where they are. And the second and third bars are either a little later, or somewhat satisfied or this middle bar. And the staff is pretty satisfied with where they are. The preference here is the parents kind of where we are or a little earlier, and the staff where we are or a little earlier. So this is where we saw the two kind of come together right there. And just to remind you, elementary school start time is 8:30. All right, so then we moved into a series of questions that asked people's opinions of what effect did they think this was going to have. And we did feel it was important to see what their perceptions were. Did they feel, based on what they know right now, that this might hurt the children? They have a sense of it's hard to get the children to school on time, or hard, if it impacts attendance. They hear their children talking about their levels of alertness. So we asked this question. There were a series of questions here. This went to secondary students, parents, and staff. And what we found, I'm going to display the data a little bit differently, is on a more negative to a more positive scale, we saw later start times had much stronger positives, with 70% of the respondents feeling both morning and afternoon focus would be improved with a later time. And 66% thinking academics will be improved, and 65% feel getting to school on time. I looked also at the negatives, and I only included things if they start to reach about the 30% rate, and the only one that rose that high was homework, 29. There were some others that were lower, maybe 13% I think was the next level, and it was much lower, but I tried to give you the highlights here. So then we looked at, what about a later middle school time? And again, the positives of a later middle school time were much stronger than the negatives. We saw, again, the students feeling that the focus, especially in the afternoon, would improve. I guess they're feeling if they get more sleep, they'll feel stronger throughout the day. They feel getting to school on time would be improved, and academic performance overall will improve. They also cited homework as a negative. So then we switch again to what about earlier middle school times? What do you think there? Will we still see the same positives, and what will we see? And here we start to see more negatives. So we started to see more negatives. So we started to see, students they feel there might be a negative effect on their focus in the morning and afternoon, that they'll be more tired in the morning and remain more tired during the day. They thought there'd be a negative on getting to school. But they did have, there they felt they'd have the positives almost flipped, that they'd have more time in the afternoon to complete their homework. So it's almost like a complete flip. And then elementary school, again, it was kind of more spread out at the elementary school. It wasn't like one, the negatives outweighed or the positives outweighed. So later elementary school time, we saw a lot of, not these high 70s and 60s and 70%, but more in the 30s and 40s, with about 30% of the people thinking later elementary times will help focus and will help kids get to school. And then worries about homework. And interesting, focus came up in both ways. So I can't really explain that one to you. I did show this to someone else and like, what does that mean? I'm like, I'm not sure. But people have different opinions, I guess is what it means. And finally, what about earlier elementary school times? And there was concern about focus in the morning for the younger children, and feeling like, getting rushed and getting to school on time. So that was a set of questions mostly focused on school-related things, attendance, getting to school and staying focused. And then there was a set of questions about what they believed the effect of these things would be on sleep and health and stress and mood and social time and safety. And again, we only looked at the top 2 or 3 responses in each group, but the perceived impact of later start times, as you see on the positive list, the numbers were very high and very strong, and the perceived negatives were much lower and many fewer, things not rising up to that almost 30% level. So the kids and the teacher, everyone believed sleep, mood, and physical health will improve at high numbers. Again, all perceptions, but we thought important. And the social time with friends they thought might be a negative. For changes in later middle, again, very similar to the high school, they felt that the positives would be sleep, mood, and physical health, but negative being social time. In earlier middle school times, they thought sleep would be affected negatively, mood might be affected, and stress level. Probably getting to school stress. We looked at the elementary. The numbers, again, they were more in the middle here. They were more 30s, 40s. There was some negatives of earlier, though. Earlier elementary on sleep, mood, and stress level. We asked questions about, what about on your family routine? How will that be impacted? How do you feel about your work schedule, your time spent on campus for teachers? That was a specific teacher question. Your childcare needs before and after, time spent with your children at home, traffic and commuting. So these were parents and staff questions. These did not go to the students. And, sorry, you went the wrong way. This was an interesting slide. We thought about 1 in 5 people reported they don't feel they have flexibility at all. And then about a quarter with slight flexibility, about another quarter with moderate flexibility, and then up to about 10% were saying that, yeah, we do have full flexibility to change our schedule. Some key findings of later start times. The most highly cited benefit came from the teachers. Later start time, they believe they'll be on campus before school. And parents said they think their routines with their children will improve. The most commonly cited concerns, the family did feel some disruption in routines. I'm sorry. Yes, they did. And the amount of time on campus in the afternoon came up as a big negative for the teachers. They're feeling like if it's later, they're going to have to get going pretty quickly, which could impact their ability to be an advisor, coach, or provide extra help. Everyone was concerned about traffic. I think that was, that always concerns people. In the middle school, again, the idea that, it kind of flipped. If we say the middle school is going to be later than time on campus before school, the teachers feel they'll be there then. Parents do concerned about family routines and time with their children. Teachers concerned about getting home and spending time out, leaving quickly to get home, to beat traffic and to be with their families. Early middle school start times, again, very similar concerns. If you move earlier, the morning commutes, they're worried about that. They're worried about time spent on campus and time with their family. So there was a lot of different concerns. I would say the biggest trends here, the most clear, were teachers worried about where will they spend their time. It will flip if we change. Everyone a little bit worried about traffic, and then we saw some in the elementary. We started to talk about student transportation to school. As you see under the big benefit again for the teachers, they think they'll be on campus before school. But the student transportation to school, the last item, started to come up, which is I was looking for to see if parents had big child care concerns. That came up here for later elementary and transportation to school for elementary. So you can see that there's a pattern to these. The way it changes, they've kind of flip-flop back and forth, the concerns. If we go earlier, start times, they're concerned about. Then at childcare after school, they're concerned about the opposite traffic. So, I'm sorry.
Just before we jump into questions and discussion, a couple of comments. First and foremost, I want to thank Ann publicly here at the table for her work and the work of the committee on this. It's honestly a very daunting task, and I credit her for the diligence and really the depth. I want to make sure that, we reiterate a couple of things within the survey discussion. It is a survey. It is perceptions of parents, and certainly we've never, as the committee, and Ann has stated this to you many times, we've never really had any challenge to the research. The scientific basis has never been in question. But I do think that this data is very important for us as we figure out what our next steps are and our next courses of action, because it defines work that we may need to do. While I appreciate that, no one here is trying to debunk any of the science or anything, there are public perceptions that we need to educate our parents about should you be trying to make a change. There are important metrics as to how your parents feel that you'll need to consider as you charge us with some more specifics on courses of action, and to not have asked these questions, or to consider that the parent input isn't somehow important, I think would be a misstep for us. So I want to credit you as well for allowing us to take this work slowly and to be able to take some time to consider this feedback so that we know what it is we're going to need to do. And even the staff results, I'm not surprised at all either that staff doesn't want to change, but certainly we wouldn't want to make a sweeping change for staff without asking the question, considering, providing the voice, and then providing time to respond to that and educate. And identify obstacles and see what changes that we can make so that we can preserve the outstanding dedication and work relationships that we have and the professionalism of the teachers that we have. So I just want to compliment you as a board in terms of how we're attacking this, and really ask you to look deeply, because you got some interesting stats in there as I look at some of this. And see different groups where you have 50% certainly in favor of one side or another, and we can change which side it's on based on which group we're talking about. But then you've got a third, 33% on the opposite side, and say, wow, that's a big number. If this were plurality or majority, we'd have an easy case here, but it's not, and it's fairly significant numbers. And how are we going to best now address both the science and the politic of the change? So we look forward to your questions, and we certainly look forward to your input so that we can continue to provide some direction and some leadership to this issue that you've brought to us.
Thank you. First of all, before we talk about anything, I do want to thank certainly you, Paul, but unbelievably you and the committee. And when we asked for this, we knew it was going to be a big job, but we didn't quite realize it was going to be a second career for you. And really, you and the committee did unbelievably prodigious amounts of work, and very carefully and thoughtfully, so thank you for that. I also want to say that we do completely agree with you, Paul, about going slowly. And not only did we do this over the course of a year, we're not even voting tonight. We're going to have a discussion tonight. After, we're going to ask you specific questions if there are any. Then we're going to have a discussion about the general merits, and then we're going to talk about a couple of specific scenarios to see if we can then move forward on what would this actually look like, and only then will we make a decision. So thank you for reminding us that going slowly is the safest course, as they say. So before a general conversation, which I hope we do have, are there any specific questions that you want to ask or pose? Okay, let's have a general conversation. Thoughts, comments?
Comments. Well, you do steal this. So people at home know this entire thing, as I destroy this place, is comments. Yeah, hold it. This is all. There's. Hold on. Let me show you the pages of. This is. I feel like I'm in a court or something at a trial. This is the survey, and these are the comments. And believe it or not, I got through about 2/3 of them on a Sunday morning at 6:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee, and it was interesting. So, you know, I think it was Tom's idea. I said, you know what, they asked for it, give it to them. And so we got it. Yeah. But it was interesting. So I don't think it was a waste at all. I thought it was pertinent, and it was interesting. It was an interesting read on a Sunday morning with coffee. It's better. It wasn't better than the Hartford Current, but almost. Anyway, so thank you. I appreciate the time. Everything that you've done, every angle you're looking at it. I often, you know, it was said, you know, there is a time to lead and there is a time to follow. And I said this before, and, you know, we like to always lead from the front. And, you know, we can get into this later too, but, you know, if you take a lead in something and no one follows, then you're out there alone, and that affects many more things in this school system. And good leaders know when to follow, and good leaders know when to lead. And sometimes you have to follow, because if you're out there alone, let's just use an example of sports, and no one's coordinating with you, it's going to be a problem for a couple of years until the other school systems come around. So, you know, when you take the anxiety, the mood, and I said this before, and the stress from one group, 70% is the number of athletes we have, you move it to another group. So just something, you know, I saw comments in there a lot about that too. So just something, you know, we could talk more in detail when we discuss it more, but just kind of thoughts in my head right now.
So, Mark, unlike you, I got through some of it, but I'm still making my way through the book. But I want to thank everybody for who participated in the survey and all of the comments that we received electronically. And this is a difficult decision to make. And again, it's not one that we can take lightly. We really have to look at this carefully and weigh all sides of the argument. Those who are in favor, you know, based on the psychological impact, is certainly, you know, overwhelming, and we know it to be true. But then on the flip side of that as well, in terms of being realistic with schedules, young children, sports, our teachers, you know, and their current schedule. So it's going to be a massive change and modification to people's schedules. And we have to take that into consideration as well. So there's a lot of things to look at when we sit down and make this decision, It has to be one where we take everything into consideration. But again, there's districts that have done this and they've done it successfully. So I'm sure there is a way that, we can make this happen, and it might be rough in the beginning, but I think eventually it will kind of smooth out. I think the ideal thing is for our legislative body to look at this issue and perhaps change it statewide, and then we wouldn't have to worry about our sports teams, arriving late or what have you. But I want to thank you, Ann. You put a lot of work in terms of leading this charge, you with the committee and the staff time and everybody involved. So I just want to say, kudos to all involved.
I also want to say thank you so much for what you've done. And I think that the progress, or the process rather, that certainly began in the fall and allowing us to be a part of it and presenting it to us in stages, I appreciate that because it allowed us to absorb the information as it was coming. I must say as well, and I know it's been described many times, that it is irrefutable in terms of the science. And I will say for me that speaks volumes. Now, that does not undermine at all the impact of the changes, the difficulties of changes, the process of changes, who is involved. I certainly recognize all of that. And yet still, I think it certainly does behoove all of us, which I think we do recognize the science behind it. But I appreciate the process. We still are gathering information, absorbing information, because it's important to make a decision that's well-rounded. And certainly that's taking all accounts and all perspectives into account. So for that reason, as our Madam Chair has spoken of, a decision is not going to be made today because we want to respect all that has been shared. So thank you so much for your work and your input, and I look forward to the continued discussion.
I'd just like to add to that we are taking our time deliberately so, and thank you so much for all your hard work and everyone on the committee volunteering their time to do this. One thing that binder that Mark displayed shows is that we're definitely listening. No one can say that we didn't listen. We're listening, but there will come a time when we do make a decision that some people may not like it. Please know that it's not an easy decision, but that's why we were elected, to make one at some point. And when we do, I know that it will have been well thought out, and tonight you'll leave with more instructions of options for us, and we look forward to hearing the results from that.
So I didn't know when I was going to bring this up, but I promised you I would in an earlier conversation. And I'm not here to debunk science or anything like that, but what I've asked for earlier on, and we really never went down that path, is the blue light and the technology and such, and how it really affects that. And this is irrefutable science too. So you have to look at it from all aspects. And again, I'm not debunking, but there is a biological component to this behavior that the brain reacts to cell phones as if it were a drug. Studies have shown that both the phone ringing and the alert of a new text causes the brain to release dopamine. And that's from Moreau, 2017, very recent. And those are the things, and this is all about sleep studies, so this is a much broader study. I just kind of brought some of the highlights in. So the other thing too is 92% of teens, part of the addiction, reported going online daily, and distributing 24% of those teens say they go online constantly. And again, that's from 2017. And what that relates to as well is depression, anxiety, some of the things that we talked about before. Teens who spend more time than average on-screen activities are more likely to be unhappy. Those who spend more time than the average of non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. And then they talk about social anxieties, about the technology as changing rapidly, difficult to keep up, the tensions in society for teenagers, and they often rely on social media to keep in touch. Lacking real interaction with others, isolation can result in learning critical social skills they need to learn in life. There's just these things that, and these, and I mentioned that the iPhone came out in 2007, so this is data this isn't 10-year-old data or anything like that. This is relevant 2017, 2015. But it talks about the interaction between schoolwork, sleep, exercise, and how it negatively affects using of the smartphone. And again, that's from 2015. So, you know, I'm not debunking any of the data that was available, but when you leave out a component, I think that technology and some of those, the science was rather old. It was 2011, 2009, 12. I can't remember exactly. I talked about it the last meeting. And I'm not saying it's old or new, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right. What I am saying is that the component of the cell phone and the teenage use of it at nighttime as they release the dopamine and such changes your physiology. So that is another component. And I just want to discuss that and mention it to you. I told you earlier I'd bring in, you know, and so there it is.
Thank you for that. I just want to say, I think you have raised a really important question, and I think next year maybe we can have a committee to study banning all cell phones from students, because I think that might solve that problem. I don't disagree with you at all. And
it's not about banning.
No. I'm
This is
only
about
kidding.
managing.
No. I of course.
My whole point was
I'm just saying
managing the
that,
time at home. So
no, absolutely. I was just teasing you. I'm just saying that you're absolutely right. It's another problem that's keeping them awake. But it seems to me that whatever the problem is that's keeping them awake, it doesn't change the fact that they're not sleeping. And so if physiologically they can't go to sleep before midnight and they're on their cell phones, that's even worse. But if cell phones are in fact a part of their lives, then we have to deal with that too. The point is that one thing has nothing to do with the other, in the sense that if they're not sleeping, they're not sleeping.
No, I guess I'm getting to the point where, and I made this argument, I didn't want to go through my lengthy conversation I had. I didn't want to reiterate everything, but to segue into this is that we own the kids 10% of the time throughout the year, and we are legislating. They don't sleep on school time. They sleep at home. And what we're trying to do or what we potentially can do is legislate what happens at home. And I don't think that's not my intent to do. And I don't want to confuse the responsibilities of things. You know, it was said too that, you know, well, cell phones are part of life. We just have to deal with it and manage it from there. Okay. That's fine. But I don't think we have to manage what happens at home. It's the parents that have to manage that at home. And although it's a new technology, and this might be a new concept, parents, might be, but we're talking about what happens at home, and we're trying to legislate what happens at home. And some of that cell phone usage is what I'm getting at. It's not about this stuff banning this, that, or anything else.
No, I was only teasing about banning. But no, I guess what I'm saying is that I think there's two different things going on. And one is, can we ask that people try to encourage more responsible use of cell phones? Absolutely. But there is this science that says that regardless of everything else, brains don't shut down. Adolescent brains don't shut down. It seems to me that that's what we need to address. That's what we might be able to address here. And I have to disagree just slightly with with what people have said so far, because I actually don't think it's that difficult. The overwhelming response has been that high school is starting too early. It seems to me parents said that, students said that, the survey said that, the letters have said that, the people have said that, the science says that. The challenge for us, it seems to me, is not whether we should change it, but how can we change things so that the disruption is as minimized as possible, that we keep the costs down, that we keep the athletic competition problem as much to a minimum as possible until everybody else catches up, and then we could deal with the rest of it. So, for example, if I had my way, I would say, let's start high school at 8:30. Seems to me that is the absolute clear scientific answer. We can't, my view. It is impossible for us to move it to 8:30. We would lose half the students in their 7th and 8th grade, 7th and 8th period classes. We'd lose teachers. It would just, where we are, that's not a reality. But it doesn't mean we can't move something specific. We can't move a little bit. It seems to me that we can adjust things, and that's what I would like to, at some point, direct you to look at, is can we look at some alternative alternatives that would be changes that wouldn't be as massive as the disruptions, but that we can still manage and yet respect the science and the findings that most people would be in favor of.
If I could, Cheryl, I think it's important to know at the end, really the direction needs to be, okay, we're done with this, or moving forward in a different way. The task that Ann did so ably, and I'm glad you guys have expressed your appreciation in the committee, is to present the work, do the legwork and the overall information about this topic. And then now it's, okay, go forward and let's give us specifics. And you can give a couple parameters. The fact is, I don't think that precludes us from looking at something else that comes up. That when, Greenwich actually just made a shift at the end of this year going into next year with their schedule because of some of the struggles they've had with the 8:30, and they're changing their overall schedule. We do have, as I've said, a credit issue coming up with 25 credits. So there's the straight, move this, no cost, this is what happens. Then there's other things we're going to continue looking at during the summer, at the beginning of the year, so we may have more information than even what you just, we're not just going to say, okay, you gave us 2 ideas, these are the 2 ideas. That's
Right. I just meant that we also have to be realistic, that if we said, okay, check out a 8:30 high school time, personally, I think, unfortunately, for the science, it would not, you'd come back and say, it is prohibitively expensive, it is prohibitively a detriment to kids' education or whatever. So, and it is still possible, it seems to me, that even if we do lay out specific options, that you would come back and say, okay, any option is going to cost us $500,000, and we're going to say, well then, sorry about the science. So, I mean, it does. Even directing you to change doesn't necessarily mean we're going to support it.
No, I completely agree with that. It gives us a parameter in terms of, okay, if we do this, X is impacted. We know this from the survey, but this is also if there's a financial cost, and we can kind of build options.
So in those options, and if we're going to hang science, our hat on the science piece, and look at that specifically, we have to look at the age groups and adolescents, and we can't in our own right minds, I would imagine, not shifting middle school earlier, because the science won't agree with that, right? So middle school can't go earlier to support high school going later, because the health of the children, what I'm hearing overwhelmingly from the science, is that we need to look at that middle school piece and not affecting it going earlier, because of the science that is in front of us that we all hanging our hats on.
Well, I think it's something, I think it depends. I think it depends on the time frame. Again, I'm just going to give you dollar amounts, kind of, that will be up for you to debate that in terms of different amounts. So there are some parameters, like, for instance, we haven't talked about, like, let's bump elementary an hour earlier, because we can't do that because the light and kids walking to bus stops. It's actually, we do not have the capability of doing that, because you wouldn't want first graders walking to bus stops at 6:45, 7 a.m. That's impossible. So these are the kind of questions that, yes, when we have parameters, then we'll give you kind of those issues that go with it.
But I think, I think your question is legitimate. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the science, not talking about when elementary schools, but if we look at and say, okay, we're going to move high school back half hour, 45 minutes, and also we're going to move it forward, and we're going to move middle school back a half hour to support the buses, so there's a low cost or little cost. The science doesn't support that, right? So that's what everyone's hanging their hat on, and is the science, and is that so if you want later start times for high school, you need to have either the current start time for middle school or later start times. You can't go earlier because it won't support it that way.
I believe that that's incorrect, and
I'm just saying that.
No, I understand your question. I'm just saying I think that the science says, because I keep asking this question,
and it starts at 12 years old.
It's right, so that it may be 8th grade, but it's not 6th and 7th.
It's your population and when you're born that year, and so it just depends. So there's seventh graders, your 12 and 13-year-old seventh graders.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that the impact on middle school in general, and middle school kids in general, is not as severe as the impact on high school kids. That's all I meant.
It didn't say high school or middle school kids. The science said adolescents, 12 and 13-year-olds. That's what was mentioned. So we could rehash that, but again, you're looking to the audience for something.
I'm looking at Ann because
Paul and I were having, the same discussion, and the research we read was using the term adolescent primarily, which is, I believe they meant about 13 years old, 12 to 13 years old, which is generally a lot of your eighth graders.
My kid's 13 and seventh grade.
Some kids, some at the end, but then you look at the sixth graders are coming in at 10 and 11, and maybe not so much for them. So,
so 2/3 of your.
And we have not seen just a middle school study. For instance, I've looked for studies, and maybe I can continue to look for studies. I haven't seen one just on middle schools. The term most often used was adolescent. And your middle school splits it right down the middle, pretty much. Maybe a little heavier to eighth grade, but it splits it down the middle.
So I'm just trying to use that science to say that we really can't touch middle school times to go earlier, if that's what I'm getting at. So that we need to keep in mind that if we're doing this for high school, that we have to pay attention to the middle school students in those adolescent ages and correctly adjust accordingly, if that's the examples that we need for next semester or in September.
If I may say, I respectfully agree and slightly disagree. I think in terms of conceptualizing how the impact it may have on high school students and middle school students, certainly so, but I don't think we can make a hard stop that definitely middle school, the science is saying that it will directly impact them as well, therefore no changes can be made. I think we have to be careful how we use and how we refer to science and data and statistics. I think the science is overwhelmingly referring to, yes, adolescents, but primarily the high school age. Yes, it will impact middle school students, but I think it's going to be a trickle-down impact, so to speak. But to say conclusively that it will undoubtedly impact middle school students, therefore we should not, I think that's quite a leap to make.
Appreciate that. Just that the adolescents, we never talked middle school and high school students. We talked adolescents and how it affects them. And adolescence starts in middle school. That's why I'm leaning that argument. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we can't change it or we won't change it. I'm just saying that if we're looking to do the high school, the impact on the middle school should be zero to minimal, because we have to keep those kids in mind as well. That's all I'm saying.
Grace?
If we also look at the survey that we gave out just to the West Hartford perception, that actually organized it from middle school to high school. So if you take a step back and not look at really like science, we could see that more in middle school, West Hartford is more like satisfied with the start time there. They didn't really want it, so that kind of is a way to separate that. I think the West Hartford kind of embodies like a more middle school, more neutral about the start times thing.
But I do think that Mark's point we have to keep in mind, in the sense that we would be talking about moving middle school earlier. And that is I think it's a lower consequence than not moving high school later, but I do think it's a real issue, and I think it has to be thought about.
So yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I hear what you're saying, Grace, and it's a great example of us listening to him. It's just that, I often look at our school system. If you look at it as a house and you look at elementary, you dig the foundation, you build the foundation, and then you build the house. And our school system is not unlike that. From pre-K now through senior year, you're developing these kids and you're giving them a base so that they can go and use everything they've learned and excel in high school and beyond. And in the middle school, you're providing those tools still to be successful in high school. And you don't want to minimize that. So it's a big piece of the building foundation to get to high school in the middle school. And I don't want to take light of that. That's all. I think it's important years, and the kids I don't want the effect to be felt and affected years later, that's all.
Let me get concrete for a second, and maybe that will help move the conversation along. Yeah, concrete for the foundation, exactly, and not crumbling. Not a crumbling foundation. We're going to build a strong foundation. One suggestion that had been put forward that I also want to reiterate here is, since we can't move elementary school realistically, and since we want to move high school later, would be in fact to flip middle school and high school, right? So that, not keeping in mind Mark's caution, is one option, right, that we might think about that would solve a high school problem. It might add a little bit to a middle school, contribute to a middle school problem. The second alternative that I would propose is, what if we did that flip, but moved everybody forward 10 or 15 minutes? That would minimize the backwards going, however you say that, of the middle school, give the bulk of the advantage to high school, which would now go from 7:30 to 8:10 or 8:15, and only move elementary school back 10 or 15 minutes, so that elementary school would stay roughly the same. Middle school would go back slightly, but high school would get the bulk of the advantage. It's not the 8:30 I want, but is that a plausible scenario to run by?
Oh, there. Yeah, that would be something like looking at 7:40 middle school or 7:45 middle school, 8:10, 8:15 high school, 8:40, 8:45 elementary school. So it's the biggest impact is certainly on high school, between 40, 45 minutes, say, or 35, 50 minutes, somewhere in that. And whereas the other groups are 10, 15 minutes.
Right, and again, this is my thought about a request to say, what would the impact of that be? And again, there's going to be an impact all over the place. But and I seem to recall somebody saying, so I'm just asking, that there had been an initial outreach to some private schools who said they might consider that. They were open to it possibly.
And yeah, the initial discussion, there's a couple places that have said, yeah, that's something we would certainly think about. So once we have more parameters, we'll spend the summer, I'll write letters and contact all the private schools and say, if we do this, two things. One, if this were done, what would you do in terms of your busing? And would that you change? And if we did this and you didn't change, what impact would it have on you in terms of busing? Because that's something that, again, that would be the financial consideration that we'd have to get a better study of, that I'm sure they wouldn't be able to give me an answer in July, but they may give me likelihoods and be able to move forward. And we could talk not just what the financial impact on the board is, but the town council and their support of private schools, because as we know, I don't want to phrase it in a way that's pejorative towards private schools. In some ways, they over-support in terms of that. So what would that impact be? I mean, would it be a no big deal to make that change?
And can I just ask, just structurally, because I don't really understand it. So our buses there are two separate buses. One group of buses transports the private school kids, and another set of buses transports the public school kids, but at the same time. Like, is there a reason that we couldn't separate them out?
No, because the private schools aren't like Northwest Catholic Elementary, Northwest Catholic Middle, Northwest Catholic High School. They're just Northwest Catholic High School. So their timing maybe pairs with Schechter's, and then that pairs with Kingswood Oxford in some ways. And so
right, but what I mean is, if none of the private schools changed, aren't those buses the same anyway?
If you did a clean switch, yes. If you did a just flip middle and high school.
No, I'm not. I'm being incoherent because I think I don't understand.
Okay.
Aren't there some buses that transport our public school kids to public schools, and other buses that transport private kids to private schools, regardless of which schools they are? And
yes,
if so,
but so that bus that transports a Northwest kid at 7:15 may transport a Sedgwick kid at 7:50.
That was my question. Okay.
And then at 8:30 is KO or Renbrook.
Okay, so that's why we can't just separate them out.
Yes.
Okay, that was my completely ignorant question.
Right. No. I was going to say, think of it as runs. A 7:30 run, an 8 o'clock run, an 8:30 run. The middle run might be a private school, it might be a public school. They're not at the same time. They're not on the same bus at the same time, but it might do private and then do a public school run and do a private school run. So it's the same bus. So think of it as runs, that is going where it needs to go to get the kids where they need to.
So I guess I'm confused now because you said the town council supports that. I thought it was state, is it state law that?
It's state law that they have to spend 2 times, Chip, 2 times the cost of what we spend to transport one of our students. So if we spend $500 to transport, when you do the math, a West Hartford public school student, that means there's $1,000 per student at Northwest Catholic that can be spent, that has to be spent. But if we're only transporting 4 kids for a school, say, and we have to transport those kids that live in West Hartford and go to a private school in West Hartford. So if we're transporting only 4 kids on a bus, inherently that cost, that $4,000, say, you're done with by September 30th or October 15th. But that transportation goes through the year. For Northwest, because of size, Northwest Catholic, the buses are basically full. There would be little shift. But then other schools, Kingswood, Oxford, doesn't have as big a footprint, So those are where the shifts are. So each school, the town council treats each school the same. You know what I mean, in terms of the private schools.
I guess I'm confused even more now. So they're supportive if we're done paying for them by state law in September, October?
The town council goes
above and beyond that?
I'm saying in one individual case it could be.
Okay.
But it could also be.
So the so to make this easy, the town of West Hartford spends more than it is obligated by state law.
That is
on
correct.
Private school busing than it should.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that.
So there's some models in some places where I'm giving you a voucher for $1,000 for transportation. So that's the issue.
So, a lot of discussion. It's hard being patient, huh, Dave? Your comment in an earlier meeting. I want to back up the proverbial bus a little bit to what some things you said, Cheryl, earlier, because I kind of felt like you've already made up your mind, based on your comments at least. You can correct me if I'm wrong about the direction the bus is going. I'm a big stats guy. I've been studying statistics for over 20 years. And whenever you say a statistic, but you preface it by saying, like, I think, you've already basically made it invalid. The statistic needs to stand alone. You can't interpret it because now you're putting a perception on it, and the perception is incorrect. So everybody here pretty much did that, where they were like looking at the numbers and they're saying, well, based on like science or the data, I think this is what the statistic is saying or the perception is. So we have to back all that up as a group. Our responsibility as a board is to analyze the statistics as it's been presented to us and then make a decision based on what that tells us. 2 totally different things, okay? So everything you were saying to me is incorrect in the sense that, and let's just take a minute. If we look at some of the things here, I don't want to brush over the fact that on one page it talks about, and Ann mentioned it, how familiar people were with this whole process. A third not at all familiar. So we can't say, for example, that an overwhelming majority of people support this and are aware of it and know about it when a third are not at all familiar and only another third are only slightly familiar. To me, right? Well, these are statistics within the survey, right? So you can't state that it's a fact or it's your conclusion. My conclusion is different, okay? I read that statistic and my conclusion or my perception is, well, a lot of people don't know what the heck is going on here. So as a town, we have to be careful to say that everybody's aware of this and an overwhelming majority of people are in support of it. which is what I thought I heard you saying.
No, I mean, I hear what you're
Uh-huh.
saying, and actually, as someone who's a father who is a statistician, he bought a book for me called How to Lie with Statistics. So I do actually know that everything we do with statistics we can alter. So I totally believe you.
Yeah,
But
there's an old phrase that figures don't lie, liars figure, right?
Right.
So it's an old stats
lies,
show,
damn
really
lies
old
with
stats show.
statistics, exactly.
Um,
No. But what I was saying was, in the survey itself, regardless of whether they knew about the work of the committee, the survey itself showed a majority of people in support of changing. That's what I meant.
Okay, so I have some other things I just wanted to mention, because I mean, I didn't go over this with coffee because I don't drink it, but I had some things, and I feel like this is important stuff that we can't just gloss over, because I feel like we're already going into options. Like, do we want to flip middle school versus high school times, or do we want to push back? It's like, well, I feel like we should really, it's our job, right, is to review this data. They've done a great job collecting it and surmising some of it for us, and if it gets too late, I apologize, maybe we can always table it and talk about it more in the fall. I'm not totally comfortable giving them options at this point, because I don't know that as a group we've even collectively discussed the data. I mean, there was a brief presentation, but we need, I think, as a group to review this thing. And I mean, it's 9:35. So I mean, I don't know how late people want to be here. I mean, we could start talking about it, but to give parameters when we haven't as a group collectively talked about what we think in any detail, I feel is paying short shrift to the year-long work that they've done. I simply am uncomfortable saying that we're going to give them options tonight when there's a lot of data here, folks. There's a lot of interesting things here that we didn't even talk about, or were kind of brushed over with a broad brush. And so I don't, I'm happy to start to go into some of this, but if at the end of the night we're telling them I don't exist anymore, that's fine. People know who I am by now. I think we need to be more thoughtful and spend more time really reviewing it, because I keep hearing, I don't know how anybody else feels about this, but I keep hearing like we're being beat over the head with the science. And there's a lot more to this decision, folks, than just the science, especially because when you read this this body of work, which is just a certain amount of perspective anyway of the entire population of people that we should be concerned about. You can't use science incorrectly. You can't broad brush and say, well, everybody benefits, or this isn't even up for debate about the benefit. Of course, the science points to the benefits of this, and I'm not disagreeing with that or debunking that either. But if you read this, and then we've also received how many emails, it hasn't all been in support. And there's plenty of comments in the comments section of people saying they don't support it either. So again, yes, I understand the science of it, but there are plenty of anecdotal stories in here, and we've received it, and I feel like that is enough that we should take pause that not everybody is overwhelmingly saying like, yeah, push my start time back. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but you also have to say then, if we do push it back, is there enough of a benefit too, right? So we can't just say, all right, well, there's a larger percentage of people that would benefit, so that's a logical conclusion we make, even though there are people that will suffer. That's how it works. But also, if we're going to push it back, we have to make sure that it is enough of a benefit that we're not just jumbling the entire town for a benefit that is minimal. Because remember, the science is telling us one thing, but the change has to match in order for the benefit to be worth it. So if we're only going to push things back like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I'm actually in agreement with you, Cheryl, that the hour is what it should really probably be if we want to try and tackle it. But I want to talk about, some things in here, and you kind of answered this earlier, but on one of the charts it says Q15, when do you usually go to bed at night? And maybe this was before you divvied it up, that I added it that 50% of kids go to bed by 11 p.m. And then, the other half are after. So was that just everybody, and then what you showed us was a broken down between high school and middle school and elementary
Yes,
school?
originally, when we were looking at the data, I put it together.
Yeah.
And then I realized, wait, we can disaggregate this.
Okay.
And the disaggregated showed, if it wasn't different, I probably would have kept it together, but it was different. It was very different. The middle schoolers go to bed earlier. by. This is the middle school, when do you usually go to bed? And that was significantly different than the high school, when do you go to bed? So I thought it was worth disaggregating it.
No, I agree. And then there's another chart, Q30. I wish there were page numbers on this. Sorry, guys. Where the question was, what effect do you think a later middle school start time would have on your students? Of course, most people were like positive effect, no effect. And then you go to the next page. What effect do you think a later school start time would have on your kids, on your child students? The positive effect versus no effect were two of the bigger responses. So I mean, I really feel like I personally feel like we need to have a more in-depth discussion about these individual responses, because I found some things striking. The biggest one, one of the bigger ones on Q39 was the effect an earlier middle school start time would have on your kid, and a lot of people were very negative in that. So reading that stat makes me feel like, okay, well, to Mark's point, like then we're just moving the problem. And for me, adolescent, but I agree with him that, that's, I have a 13-year-old that would be in 7th grade. I have an 11-year-old that's going to be 12 in 6th grade. I mean, a lot of it depends on birth month. So you can't also just say adolescence starts in 7th grade or teenage or 8th grade. I think we have potentially some 6th graders that fall into that cohort as well. And so, again, I think this data requires more review. And that's probably something that we should do before we're telling these folks these are our choices. But to one point that was brought up by Tom and you guys, I would love the outreach to the private schools to happen now. So I know that it helps when you have an exact, well, these are the 3 options that are available, but you can still have discussions like, hey, obviously, if you follow the newspapers at all in our town, or if you are really bored at night and watch one of these meetings, that they're considering moving the start time. If they're going to move the start time back, it's going to be probably a minimum of half an hour. What's your response to that? I would just like to know if some of them are like, it doesn't matter what you do, West Hartford, we ain't moving. I'd like to know if that response is out there. I'd also like to know, like, well, yes, we would consider it X. Those discussions that happen now, because to your point about the budget, that's a huge driver. And to an individual that spoke earlier, I appreciated his comment that it's like, well, but that shouldn't be an absolute no, to kind of like what you were saying, well, if it's $500,000, well, forget about it. Because, to defend you, like I kind of thought that earlier too, but then I'm like, well, but if we are the leaders and it is a $500,000 cost, maybe we should have to find a way to absorb that without necessarily just increasing our budget $500,000. If the science is telling us to do it, and that's what ultimately the cost is going to be, but we don't know because we need to be told that, then as leaders, shouldn't we then maybe consider doing that? So you see how it's like difficult and complicated and all over the place? So I feel like those discussions need to be had, and we haven't done that at all.
I really actually appreciate this process, and we did get a lot of data in the last couple of days, and the good part is we don't need to vote tonight on whether or not to move school start times. We don't need to absorb all of these comments and make a firm decision tonight about moving school start times. What we're hoping to do is ask the administration to examine some more firm options so that we can figure out what would be the real consequence to transportation, before and after school care, professional development, sports for both students and for the teacher coaches, and on and on. There are lots of different things to look at, and I think the committee, though it has done yeoman's work over the last 10 months or so, has been somewhat limited by the fact that we haven't provided more specific parameters around what the impact would be. And that is demonstrated so clearly in the survey by the question that asks about would you prefer the school to start slightly later, a lot later? Like, well, what's slightly later? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? That is a matter of perception. I think if we had been able to ask parents, well, what do you think about a 30-minute delay? What do you think about a 10-minute delay? We may have gotten different answers. And so the advantage of the summer is that we can put together some options tonight. We can ask our administrative team to plan these out as if they might actually happen, and come back to us with, here's a plan for option A. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like for elementary school families. This is what it looks like for middle school families. This is what it looks like for high school families. This is what it looks like for private school families. This is what it looks like for teachers, and on and on. And this is how much it costs. Then, as a board, we can examine that and say, okay, we have these survey results. We now have a detailed plan. We can decide as a board if we think the benefits of option A are outweighing whatever the detriments of option A are. And if we think it is worthwhile to spend whatever money it costs to implement option A or option B, whatever the different options are. So I actually really appreciate the opportunity to come up with some firm ideas tonight and ask the administration to plan out for us so that we can really take a look and then use the survey results to inform how we look at the plans that are developed by the administration later on this calendar year. So I would recommend that we put some options on the table.
And to add to Deb, one of the options would be no change.
Right. Yes.
Right. So even though we're asking our staff to get us some variables, plug in the variables, another one is no change. So we're not making a firm decision tonight. We're asking for more details. We also have the summer to further review this and discuss the survey results to get more input.
Oh, go ahead.
And to this point, is that I agree with Deb saying, given what Rob and even Dave said, so that, we make the agenda, right? So we don't have to come back in September and make a hard vote. We don't have to. We can review this stuff again, and our first meeting doesn't have to be, do we change times or stay? We don't have to do that. We have the ability, because we're the governing body, to take a little more step back and look at it more objectively or subjectively and figure it out. So, there's no hard lines in the sand here, so we should be aware of that as well. So as a group, we can, Tom, you're looking.
No, I'm glad you said that, because we want to do this right no matter what. Right. Because I may not say in September, we have this financial cost exactly figured out. I mean, we want to do things. I want to give you information that is really helpful and is complete, not a guess. And so.
Well, and to pat ourselves on the back, that's exactly why we're not voting tonight, right? I mean, we already made that agreement that we can't possibly answer yet.
I think 6 months ago, people thought we were going to make a vote tonight.
We thought we'd make a vote tonight, I think. Absolutely.
So I think the time is on our side here, right?
Yes, it is, to quote that famous rock song. Okay, so then specific proposals, I had put 2 out there. One is switch middle school and high school, and one is switch middle school and high school, but move everybody back 10 or 15 minutes. Are there other possibilities that we might want to consider?
So I mean, as a governing body, should we try and limit, if we're I don't think we should do this today, but if we're going to give them options today, which I just said I didn't want to do, should we be giving them options that we just think we would never, like make them waste their time? Yeah. Because I don't understand how we would just say flip middle and high school. So that means the middle school is going back to a 7:30 start time? And that's something that this body would consider voting on as a yes?
See, that was my point, the thing that I don't think we should.
No, and I'm not dictating your votes. That's the example of the cleanest, I know it's no cost. That's the that's the reason but that's.
See, my argument earlier is why I wouldn't consider that. Because if you're going to hang your hat on science and not money, it affects I'm saying 2/3 of the students at adolescence. And adolescence isn't a hard number, ladies and gentlemen. It's not 12. It's not 11.5.7. It's when the body tells you it's going through it, okay?
But it is certainly all 4 years of high school. But that's besides the point. If, in fact, I'm the only one who would consider it, then we should not even bother the administrator. You're absolutely right.
I guess that's my point, is I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because as a body, we haven't really discussed, enough of the results. I still have a huge problem with the fact, I was really jarred by the fact that a third of the population was like, what's this? Extrapolate that out to maybe the whole town. Who knows how much the town is even aware of this? If you just go by the public comment for the last year, it's been underwhelming, to say the least. We've had the same people by and large, and I admire them in their passion, but we've had the largely same group of a small number of people. I don't want to say number because we did that once and got yelled at. That are coming in to voice their opinion about the issue. It's not a big number on either side of the issue. So they've had almost a year to respond and give us their input, and we're just not getting it. And then you hear that a third of the people aren't even aware of this. So it's like, I have real concern that, we could be contemplating a change that a huge portion of our community is totally unaware of. That's chilling to me.
I don't disagree, except that if I understand, and again, I may have misunderstood the numbers, if 7,000 people could have answered it, and 3,500 did, right, half the people who could have answered it did answer it.
There's a bigger number than that.
Right, but overall, right, so if you put it all together, of all the people who could have answered it, of all the interested parties, somewhere between a third and a half of all the people did answer it. Those people, a third of them had not heard of it before, but they did weigh in on the question. Yeah. That's all I meant. So that in other words, we've heard from roughly half the people that would be affected, maybe 40%, something. I'm doing math in my head here quickly, but and
we heard from them, but they
have. Sorry.
Right, but how many didn't know before they had the survey?
Well, right, but they have had the survey, and that we have asked them what they think, and now they've said what they think. Now, it may not be it may not be well thought out. I have no opinion, but in fact, we know what this group of people, whether they knew about it before or not, what they think now. That's all I meant. But the point is, but that's neither here nor there. What I do understand, and Tom both saying, is that we can't move forward on our decision. We can't get more specific information that we've asked for until we give specific parameters, that we've been too vague. So all I'm saying is, okay, let's get some parameters. You're absolutely right. Let's not give them parameters we're not going to support. So if, in fact, people would not support the flip, then we shouldn't do that, and we should only stick with the flip plus 15 minutes or whatever it is. But so I totally agree with you about that.
Okay. So I didn't know if that was something we wanted to do tonight, because we could, just like we were saying a moment ago, we don't have to decide anything in September. We don't even have to do this tonight. Like, we could spend more time.
This is our last.
The only point here is our last meeting until September. I don't know the legal ramifications if we were to meet an executive session and come up with.
It wouldn't be a topic for executive session.
Okay, so then it would have to be a public meeting, and then. So then it would, and can you schedule another public meeting in 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks, a month?
You can.
Yeah, right, so.
We just do whatever we want to do.
Well, yeah, and I'm just putting that out on the table, so.
Well, right.
You see what I'm getting at?
Well, not exactly, because I don't see why we can't ask.
I see what you're getting at, but because there is the no change option, I'm comfortable giving some direction tonight for research.
Okay.
And I know that I'm open to voting for no change if the research comes back and says it's not going to work.
So then let's have the discussion right now about, like, am I the only one that doesn't like flipping 7:30 to 8:30? Or, I'm not trying to pigeonhole you, or like you're the only one that likes it. I mean, should we do that? I mean, we give them that direction, because to your point, I like that you're saying no change, because I think that should be considered. But then we also, I don't think we should just say without saying how every individual feels, right? Because then that gives them better direction.
Right.
So what are the options? Let's all say what we feel about those options, and then they know if it's a viable thing that we would consider someday.
So,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, right? So we only give them options that I think as a board we would even just consider, because if we're not going to consider, like your point, why?
I mean, why do Paul and
exercise?
Ann and the committee need to spend time on looking at 7:30 versus 8:30 if we're just going to come back in 3 months and be like, well, we never would have.
And for a
that.
baseline, I think we could all, I don't want to speak for everyone, we could all decide as no change being like a option, right? So we agree on that. So then,
If I could, just one thing, this won't preclude us from looking at something else that comes up in the interim. I mean, that, I just want to make sure.
It shouldn't.
If so, yeah, exactly, okay.
Okay, so then let me put out a concrete one that people seem to at least find plausible, if it would work, is a flip with a 10 or 15-minute delay.
So just spell it out exactly so we're all on the same page.
Right, so that would be flipping, having middle school start first, and then high school, and then elementary school, but moving everybody back from the current, everybody later from the current time, 10 or 15 minutes, depending on what.
Yeah, so you're looking at, instead of middle school starting at 8, middle school starting at either 7:45, 7:50. High school, instead of starting at 7:30, goes to 8:10 or 8:15. Elementary school goes to
8:40 or
8:45. And the only reason I'm equivocating is because I want to look at the transportation routes and make sure that it absolutely still takes 30 minutes in between each route, so.
Oh, sorry, so is that a plausible option to
Works for me.
consider?
For
It may not
Be open-minded to that.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that as
Are there other, okay.
an option.
An option. Are there other options that we should look at?
you're still doing middle school earlier. Only by, but I mean.
No, so that's what I'm saying. So are there other options that you want to throw out that we could?
Well, I'm just saying that, again, back to my original argument, that middle school, it's only 15 minutes. Well,
Absolutely.
you know
That's
what I mean?
and you
It's
may
all-
decide it's not
So
worth
if we
it.
move high school up 45 minutes, it's only 45. We don't want to get into that either.
Right, so that's
I
what I'm
think
saying.
that's
So
why
let's
if you're
talk
gonna-
about concrete, right, so
Science.
are there other specific time proposals that you want to make that they should investigate?
I would like to propose something much different than that, just as another option, which would be to change high school only, and only on Wednesdays. So it would still be a short Wednesday, and high school would start at approximately 9 o'clock that day. So elementary schools, no change at all Monday through Friday. Middle schools, no change at all Monday through Friday. High school, no change at all Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Sleep in on Wednesdays.
To clarify that with Deb, and you brought this up with me before, that would, let's say high school then goes 2 to 2:30, which puts the bus runs then in middle school 1:32, 2:30, solves that. And then high school professional development, we're not moving that to the morning, we're moving that to 2:45 after school. That would go till, say, 4:45.
You could decide that.
Okay, I appreciate that.
That's up to you guys. I don't think that's a board decision, to be honest.
But I have always looked at as our professional development as a keystone to our why we always have these accolades of why West Hartford is so great. Our teachers, our our Board of Ed, things like that. Right now, I'm joking about that one. But not the teachers administration. But we always, and I clearly, friends and families and people that I talk to throughout the country, why is West Hartford so good? And I always go back to, and I think we all agree, is that our professional development on Wednesdays separates the wheat from the chaff for the rest of and that's why I think West Hartford is one of the successes. And it's almost the Midas touch that I don't want to touch. I want to leave that.
I'm not sure I understand that.
I don't
I
wanna-
agree with you, but I don't think this
I don't want to
changes
mess
that.
with that.
No, I think that's
Oh.
a key element there, and it's why I clarified
Yes.
with Deb, and that listen, Paul would beat me over the head if we tried to move it to the morning, because then that separates
Right.
us by discipline, and you can't do some of the things. During the afternoon, there are certainly accommodations that could be made. That's something we could look at and get back to you with what.
You know, on the surface, I think, I'm listening to you, oh, wow, that makes sense. But then the professional development days, and I don't want to harm that model, I guess. I don't want to fringe that model at all.
And again, that's why we would have the administration look into it over the summer and get back to us. And if they say, look, the problem with the Wednesday option that you came up with is it would completely disrupt, we couldn't find a way to keep our model of professional development where we go across the whole district. We just couldn't find a way to do it. Okay, that's information for us to have as a board when we make our decision about whether or not to make a change and what that change is.
So we're talking about a one-day-a-week change. I'm not in favor of that. And on Wednesday, they have a system that works really well. Maybe I'm just not knowledgeable, but I don't understand how that, it seems like a hugely negative impact to our teachers, to have to push them that much later into the afternoon hours. Is there contractual issues that would come up if we did that?
I'd have to look at it, to be honest with you. My inclination would be, no, there isn't, because elementary currently is 2:30 to 4:30, because it's staggered already, and it's one contract. But we'd have to look at, there's questions that I can't answer off the top of my head now, but I understand, and I appreciate your point. I'd need to look at it and make sure there wasn't the impact, and Paul and Ann would certainly.
And it's not a wholesale change. Like I thought if we're going to do something, we're trying to do a wholesale change, one day a week, right?
I just want to clarify that I'm presenting this option not because I don't think I could vote for a wholesale change. I think I could potentially vote for a wholesale change. I just am looking for a backup option that gets us a half a loaf of bread, if you would, if we can't make a wholesale change for some other practical reasons. I think there are some schools that have a one-day later start. Kingswood Oxford, for example, is one of them. I consider that many people sleep in on the weekends, and this would be just another opportunity for students to sleep in, teachers too, if they want, one day per week, or if they want to get up early and use the time some other way, they could do that. So I'm not presenting this option as the only idea. I think I'm very open-minded to the idea of changing for 5 days a week if we can make it work. But if we can't, I'd like to see if this might be a backup plan.
Yeah, so I don't think it goes with anything that we've been discussing tonight, because we've been trying to talk about if we can somehow afford a wholesale change, teachers won't get up later. And I think it's just wasting the committee's time, because it doesn't, to me at least, seem like something I could support as any sort of significant change. So that's not something I would recommend they do.
For me, when I first, I jumped in. All right. Real quick though, my initial reaction is I don't think that would work, but I go back to what we've talked about in previous meetings, and I think Rob, you recommended, or we look into the bus situation, for example. What if we did the buses ourselves instead of outsourcing everything? What if we had our own fleet of buses, or maybe we hired the drivers, or something of that nature? And the initial reaction of the administration is, it's probably not going to work. But as a board, we said, when the time comes, can you take a look at it? And then we could make an informed decision. And this may be another one. Get us the numbers. We'll take a look then and see. Maybe it totally doesn't make sense. But then again, if we can't get everything we wanted, this may be something to consider. This doesn't mean right now that I would vote for it, but I don't have the information, so I can't make that decision.
So this is the opportunity for us to provide some options. We may not like all the options. And I love the option on the table as no change, because that's an option. But I think this is the opportunity tonight, for us to give the administration some information so you have an idea of what we're looking at, so you can come back to us with some facts or some hard data to say, okay, this may work, this definitely isn't going to work, and because. And you would tell us why. And then you can say, well, perhaps you might want to be able to combine this A and B, but C is definitely out. So I'm in favor of us presenting some options to you all so that you can come back and then give us, you can educate us and give us the information that we need to eventually decide or vote.
I'm going to throw a huge monkey wrench into this thing. So if we decide as a group to change the high school times so that these adolescents get more sleep, do we as a governing body tell the football team they can't go out and practice in all of August at 6:30 in the morning before the heat? Do we tell the track team that's getting ready for or the cross-country team getting ready for the fall that they can't go run 6:30 in the morning before the heat? Things like that, because the science, remember, you shouldn't be waking up that early. And they are our students. I'm just, you want to change school times, and then, and if the science is so critically clear, then it affects a lot.
It does, Mark. I don't see anybody else even suggesting that. Maybe you're just putting a hypothetical.
I'm not suggesting it. I'm just, we're putting science on the table as irrefutable, and I heard that thing 3,000 times. And, if it is that irrefutable, these things matter, right?
But,
I'm just saying.
I just want to throw things out there. We can tackle one issue at a time here. If that's something you want to consider and make a motion for, go ahead. But otherwise, if we're just throwing things at the wall,
I guess what I'm asking, are we going through science or are we going through money? What's the decision-making process?
I actually appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important for us to, at least for me, I think it's important as we discuss this to get a sense of what framework are we looking through. So oftentimes a metaphor of building a house, building a foundation was used. So in applying the science to that, we know that many times there was a time where houses were built, and when paint was used, lead paint was used. And it's a matter of deciding, okay, are we going to continue to live in this house with lead paint, or are we going to do something about it? So I think it's a matter of, are we looking at options from the perspective of should we, or how do we make it work? So that's where I am. I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate things that are happening, but we've received information for a long period of time. We have plethora of data information. I think at some point we're going to need to move towards some type of assertive direction. And so for myself, from what has been shared, my lens is, okay, we need to make it work. I certainly want us to continue to discuss how to make it work. Certainly we need to be thorough with that process.
Carol, I never said we shouldn't do options. I'm in agreement we should actually do options, but I want to give them options that we'll actually consider supporting. So to just give them options to go off into the woods and review is a complete and utter disservice to everything that they're doing. I'm saying, then let's talk about what options we want to do. And I agree with Mark. It's like, what's driving this train? There's two main horses. There's science and there's money. And so we have to factor that into the decision-making process. That's really what it's all about. And so what are those options going to be? And I'm hearing options that, at least from my perspective, no disrespect to you, it's your right to bring up that option, but that I based on everything we've heard for the last year, with the science being beaten over our head, and I understand it, but also much less time with the budgetary, is we need to give them options that we can actually at least say, well, once we get more information, we can consider that. So that's what I'm saying. Let's give them options we'll consider, not just any options.
Right. So just to pull this together, are there other options that people might consider? I have to say that everything that's been on the table, I am at least open-minded about. There are some I prefer more than others. There are some I have doubts about, but I am willing to be educated and find out that might work or might not work. But are there other options that we might consider, that we might in fact consider, and we should ask them to look at? I don't want to overlook any opportunity now to have another solution.
So just a process question. I'm wondering, Rob, if you would feel more comfortable if each of the options was presented as a motion that we voted upon individually as a board, and then if one of the options has enough support, then the administration will look into it. If it doesn't have enough support, the administration won't look into it. And I would consider these votes not to be a board member indicating support for the idea, but a board member indicating support for the administration looking into the idea. Would that make you feel more comfortable?
I think we just need to give them clarity, whether you want to go Robert's rules and do a motion, or if we just want to be more laissez-faire about it and just say to them, they're here, like, this is what we support, or this is what we don't support, and if there's a majority that supports it, then go do it. I don't care. I don't think we've given them any consensus. So it's like we've all expressed some opinions about, but we've jumped around to different options. Some people said they liked, some people they didn't, so.
I want to, I guess we're getting close to there. I just want you to recognize too, given all this science, we are some of the best high schools in the country. We are a exercise of excellence. What we have on the table right now is some of the best schooling, the best teaching, the best administration, the best scores. And we heard that the scores won't go up any incrementally. What we have is a model of success here right now. So when we go and try to manipulate and change, make those decisions with, we have one of the best models available. So when you make those decisions, you are putting a change in a model that people are trying to emulate.
And I feel that's a great point. And we're taking that into account by no change being an option. Totally, so your point is good. We've addressed that.
But we're also addressing changes too. Okay. And that's what I made that a point for.
And that would be something we consider, what you just said, please repeat that in September when it comes to this, because that's good stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so as an informal show of hands, not a Robert's Rules of Order, who would be in favor of considering a swap of middle school, high school, except moving it 15 minutes later, as an option to ask them to check out? Okay. How many people would be willing to consider hearing the answer about what it would be to switch Wednesday for high school to move everything by roughly an hour and a half, everything back? Just as an option. That's the Deb proposal. Sorry.
I'll listen.
I'm listening. Right. I'm not saying I'm in favor. Okay. I'll throw out the third one, but I don't think that anyone other than me is going to raise their hands. Does anybody want to hear the results of a straight swap, middle school, high school, and then leaving elementary school as it is? Just a straight, yeah. In other words, high school middle school at 7:30, high school at 8, elementary school at 8:30. Just a straight swap of middle school and high school. Would anybody be willing to consider that? Just two of us. So don't consider that one. Forget that. Are there any other proposals that people can come up with, knowing that something else? Oh, no option, of course.
That's a hard one to figure out.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on that one. Yeah, I think even though we've kind of dismissed it, but I mean, especially since I feel like that's one thing I got from all the discussions in the science the most was, we talk about it being too expensive, but what if we move high school from 7:30 to 8:30? I mean, we've talked around it a lot, but we haven't really drilled down.
Good.
So we need to know what that means.
Okay, so if high school, would that mean, maybe we can leave this up to them, I don't know how much need, but would that mean elementary goes to 7:30? No. Or does it mean everybody moves to later, or just? Just high school. But you can't, because then
high school and
elementary
school can't have buzz at the same time, so you have to move
it would just cost
elementary
more
too.
money.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
What? No, you do.
No, we do
You
know.
do know.
No, that's a massive cost.
What's massive?
2-point-something million, yeah.
All right. Glad that's been done. So I don't know what the option is then, that if you wanted to push high school back an hour, what that means then for elementary.
Push everything up an hour.
Elementary would have to go, if you moved high school to 8:30, the easiest to switch is elementary
9?
then goes to 9, middle school stays at 8.
Okay,
I would like to hear that.
Sure.
I mean, the point is to try and get the high school kids to 8:30, right? Some way.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And you don't want to shift anyone back to 7:30, because I think that's the problem I have with like all this swapping and switching. It's like if we're determining that 7:30 is just so awful for high school kids, it's like, I just don't know why we think anyone should go start school at that time.
Amen.
You know, I mean, I understand the science of it, and it's worse for the high school kids, but again, how you're qualifying that statement, it's worse for those kids. It's probably not good for anybody.
Right.
So I would like to know what that's going to cost.
Okay, so third option?
Yeah,
just
the
to
only
be
thing
clear?
I do
Okay.
want, and just for clarity purposes, when we talk about moving the morning starts, we're also talking about moving the end. So high school would then be 8:30.
Yeah, this is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Everything
because
should-
we could take minutes off periods
Nope.
too, but that's,
No.
I'm not advocating for
We're
it. I'm
here
just
for
saying-
education, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that. But that would make high school 8:30 to 3:15, and elementary school would now be 9 to 3:45, 3:50.
And the impact and what it would cost in sports and all that.
Right, so that, but I think, you're absolutely right. I wasn't nervy enough to go there, but you were, so bravo. You're absolutely right. Let's try it. I mean, let's find out. Because if the daycare shifts to earlier, but it's the same hour and a half, let's ask. Is there enough people? We have 3 options on the table. Bingo?
4, actually.
No option, no is no change, right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Can I make a radical proposal? In the spirit of letting children go to sleep at a reasonable time, could we switch the student presentations and your report? Or are you falling? I knew you were. Tom needs to sleep.
They're graduating, they're gonna go out afterwards.
Well,
I've gotta
that's-
get up in the morning.
You're so right, you're so right.
No, that's fine, okay.
Is that okay? Just. Are you okay with that, Tom? Okay.
On the promise, you go to bed early.
That's right, that's right. No blue screens, none.
Okay, so at Conard, Senior Athletic Awards were last night, and we awarded lots of seniors who have played sports all 3 of their years. And this week, we awarded 211 11th and 12th graders and 300 9th and 10th graders at different upperclassmen and underclassmen awards. There were also student council elections last Friday, which was my senior skip day, but I was staying there running the booth, and we elected all of the members, so we're really excited, and the Board of Ed rep for next year is also super excited, and I can't wait to see how everything turns out with him. Also,
do you get to tell us who that is?
His name is Gus Bacon. Yeah. Anyway, so graduation is obviously, you guys know, on the 19th, and we're all super excited for Safe Grad, except we don't know what it is, and all of the parents are plotting. He knows, yeah. So we're very curious. The Unified Theater Show was last week, and everybody says that it was one of the best shows ever, and that's something that Conard and Hall prides himself on. It's such an amazing production. And personally, I just want to say thanks to you guys this last meeting, and I grew so much here, like public speaking and just everything, like municipal politics. I really am interested in it, and I grew a lot here, and I love it. So thank you guys so much.
This year is quickly coming to a close. It's very bittersweet as a graduating senior, and so there are the usual end-of-year events, such as the junior prom, which was hosted at the Hartford Marriott for the first time, and it looked really fun, and it looked like a great night. This past weekend was my senior prom at the Basketball Hall of Fame in Massachusetts, and it was really fun and exciting, and a great way to celebrate the end of the year with all my friends. Last week was senior outing, and more than 50 seniors went to Six Flags, and then the next day, all the physics students took a trip to Lake Compounce for Physics Day. Later that night, the annual award ceremony was held, and many scholarships and awards were distributed. Congratulations to all who were recognized, and a special congratulations to Cole Canary and Kate Barnett, who are going to West Point and the Coast Guard Academy, respectively. They got special recognition at the ceremony. Congratulations to boys outdoor track and field for winning states and girls for placing second. And congratulations to Hall Class of 2015 Grant O'Connor for winning the Division III 5K race and being named one of the top Division III athletes of the year. And graduation is coming up soon, and I hope to see some of the board at hall, the Superior School Hall. And thank you so much, as Grace said, thank you so much for this year. It's been such a pleasure and an incredible opportunity, and I'll miss it. And also, I'd like to announce that although we haven't had elections yet, the Board of Ed Rep for next year will be Megan Striff-Cave. I'm not guessing she's running unopposed, though. She's incredible, and I'm just so excited to see what she'll do. She'll be amazing. Thank you.
Well, now we're going to put you off for another minute, Tom, because Maddie and Grace, we're totally looking forward to Gus and Megan, but we as a group agreed that we wanted to thank you for your incredibly tireless, and I emphasize tireless, given the time, service, not just because you guys stayed up late, and not just because you kept your finger on the pulse of high school, you organized petitions, you turned every single story into a triumph, which is sometimes a challenge in high school, but really you reminded us of why we're here, and we particularly wanted to commend you on your faithful and energetic participation in all of our conversations. We can't tell you how important it is to have student voices in this conversation. We think a lot of stuff about what we think should happen, but we really, really need to hear from the students themselves, and your contributions have been absolutely incredible and so helpful to us. It makes us better and stronger as a board, and we have learned a lot from you. You both are amazing, and you're going to be amazing gifts to your colleges. They're really lucky to have you, and we were lucky to have you this year. We wish you the best of luck and our deepest thanks for everything, and we have very small tokens of our love and appreciation.
There are alarm clocks to get up early.
That's right. Now, stay if you will, but now you can go.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Backtracking from, dare I say, the sublime to the ridiculous. The report of the superintendent.
I think we've won like 8 more awards while I've been waiting. No. First off, last Thursday night, and I want to thank Cheryl on behalf of the WHEA for speaking to the Teachers Retirement Banquet, which is always a great night for our teaching family to come together. And we had 3 unbelievable finalists for Teacher of the Year, and in a very difficult decision, I want to congratulate Sonia Stemmer, West Hartford's new Teacher of the Year, language arts teacher at Sedgwick, who her first line of her application I mentioned previously, she considers it a privilege to be a teacher, and it comes through in everything she does. So we're very excited to have her represent West Hartford through the State Teacher of the Year this coming year and moving forward. But Sonia is very excited, but not as excited as her students that were observed and did the work. They were thrilled for her. Tomorrow is Morley's 90th birthday party at 9:30 a.m. And actually the Hartford Current and Michaela put together Morley stories through the years that are really interesting. So it's a good read. So thank you, Michaela, for that. Maddie mentioned it. I want to thank, and I know Dave and Mark will talk about, but thanks, Mark, for speaking at our military induction ceremony last Tuesday night, that Paul does so much work to organize. What a special night for our kids. Shelley Solomon was here earlier. She cut out like a slacker, but she was the Keeper of the Light Award winner from the Pupil Services Department this year, which is a great testament to Shelley's devotion to kids and to all kids from all backgrounds. So congratulations to Shelley. And with that, graduation is June 19th. Pray for good weather. So looking forward to it. It's been awards, celebrations, and this is a special group of kids moving on from both places who have taken the legacy passed on to them and continued to build on it. And Roszena and I know Mark did after, just had a great time yesterday talking to kids from both Hall and Conard about their experiences K through 12, and really learned a lot. And there were things we called Julio and Dan immediately after, hey, do you know this? And so we'll be following up with them also.
Thank you. See, it was worth waiting for. That's the key. Okay, now to go from the ridiculous back to the sublime, let's get to the financial report. Can I have a motion that the Board of Ed approve the financial report for the period ending April 30th, 2018?
So moved.
Second? Discussion, please.
All right, I'm up.
Dave's up.
This is me. We're starting on page 12 of our booklet. There's a very little action again this month because we're in the middle of the year. This is for the period ending April 30th. As you look on the far right column, the difference and increase or decrease in different accounts here. And you'll see, although it always pains me to say it, the $140,000 increase is not a big change in our large budget picture. But let's go to page 13, the general fund report, and we'll look at some specific numbers. Probably the one you want to look at, the only one that really stands out is 5116 technical support is up $30,000. This is security overtime, but security overtime as a whole is down for the year. So that's a small change. Everything else that you see in the right column changed from the prior month is just minor updates. Let's see, and we can go to, if we go down to 5345 under purchase services, we'll see pupil transportation, and it's looking good, not as high as we'd projected. Great job, Chip. Thank you, with the good projections there. So we had some extra wiggle room there for those amounts. Let's see, next page is state and federal grants funds, and you'll see if you look at the bottom portion, all the money's been spent. We're getting closer to the end of the year, so we're getting a better idea of what will carry over from last year, or from next year, excuse me, carry over to next year. The good news here is there's no lost money. Anything that's left over here will carry over to the coming year. Special funds, nothing to talk about there on page 15. So then our last one is on page 16, the nutrition services budget. Food services continues to look stable. It's close to break even. And the big driver right now is salary and benefits, as we've discussed. That's under negotiations. So with that, that was a quick run through. Any questions for Chip? That ends my report.
Before we vote to accept it, are you still doing it next year, or is there a shift?
Well, we'll continue until November at least.
Okay.
And we'll see if there's another interested person from our party who would like to take over that.
Perfect, okay. So all in favor of accepting this report, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, surprisingly, the ayes have it. Thank you. That's right. Worth it. Okay, communications and reports.
What about the minutes?
No.
Sorry?
What? Did I miss?
There is it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I turned the page again. I keep missing things. You're absolutely. Sorry, I thought this came before the mission. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Okay, can I have a motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of May 15th?
I make a motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I abstain since I wasn't here. Rob, do I assume you do too? Yep. Okay. 2 abstentions. Okay, so that is moved and accepted. Now, board member communications and reports. Sorry.
All right. You got it, Karen? Go for it.
I just really want to give a shout out to the West Hartford Foundation of Public Schools. To the board members and all the other members, what I want to say is this is a very hardworking group, and just the partnership between the foundation and the schools just goes without saying. I mean, we heard all the great things that were presented tonight, and a majority of those things just wouldn't happen without that board and all the hard work they do in terms of raising money and providing grants for the various activities. So the other piece that I wanted to say, this is really for the general public, for others who haven't heard of the big fundraiser, which is the West Hartford Cooking. If you haven't had a chance to attend, please put it on your calendar for next year and try to attend West Hartford Cooking. I mean, great food, entertainment, and just a great time socializing and getting to know the people in and around town who makes our schools what they are. So good job if anybody's still up watching us.
Thank you. Hey, I'm getting my second wind here. I don't know. Let's keep going. I was losing it in the middle of the meeting. Mark and myself, Paul, Ann, and Tom, and if I missed anybody else, forgive me. We had the honor to attend the recognition of the 22 West Hartford seniors who will be entering the military this year. Now, these were students not only from Conard and Hall, but also Northwest Catholic, Kingswood, Oxford, and Loomis Chaffee. And it was neat to have everybody get together. This is the third year we're doing it. Paul, thank you for everything you did. It was just wonderful. It gets better every year. In the past 2 years, it's been at the American Legion. This year, it moved to Town Hall, which gave us more elbow room. It was really nice. We had the Conard Choir come and sing. It was beautiful. Everyone was recognized. Each individual was brought up on stage to a round of applause, got a red, white, and blue cord that they will wear at graduation. Some of the students are going active duty, some are going National Guard, others going to ROTC. So it's a great mix of what's happening. And Ann and Mark and myself got to sit at a table with Malik Brown, who's going to train at Fort Leonard Wood, where Mark and I have both served. Lost in the Woods, it's called. And so that was really neat to tell some stories about that. And here, Mark's got great stories to tell of his days in the military, and I can tell you about changing flat tires. Yeah, but so it was good. We had opening comments by Tom, closing remarks by Mark, and the Medal of Honor winner recipient Buddy Buka was the featured speaker, and what an honor it was to hear from him, a dynamic person telling about leadership and the keys to effective leadership, which was a good message all around. So thank you to the American Legion and West Hartford Public Schools for this event. Didn't have it back in my day when I joined, so I'm really happy to always be a part of that.
Just want to echo the Buddy was, I have not, the only time I have seen speakers that have done such a job like this is the guys that get paid $100,000 to come and speak to you at big sales events and things like that. This guy was unbelievable. I mean, and we're lucky to have his daughter at Conard next year as a lacrosse coach, right? Yep. He's from down the southwest part of Connecticut, and I just, Tom, if you can get him for your convocation, I'm telling you, this guy, I actually feel bad for you guys that you didn't get to see and talk to him. I have not personally ever met a Medal of Honor winner, and I was just kind of in awe just to even shake his hand and say hello. So, unbelievable. If we could. I had the job of folling him, and that felt like that was the worst job in the world. So, but anyway, Dave, you did a great job. I know Tom and I talked afterwards, because his speech on leadership, it would bode so well at convocation, and I would certainly give my time up for that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you both. Other reports, information, discussions? Okay, so announcement of future meeting dates. Sorry, those of you who are addicted, but the next meeting is not until September 4th, which is, of course, a Tuesday. Our next regular Board of Education meeting, as usual, at 7, as usual, right here on 50 South Main Street in the legislative chambers. A request for future agenda items. I think we have an action-packed agenda coming up anyway. Comments from any hardy visitors still with us? Hearing none, and with no executive session, do I have a move? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.